Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and once again, we are joined by our very, very dear friend. He is Spencer, also known as DAMN FOOL IDEALISTIC CRUSADER, our dear friend, a wonderful YouTube channel. And for purposes of today's conversation, a James Bond enthusiast and expert extraordinaire. And he has been on the channel as a guest on a number of occasions before, but we'd like to take this opportunity to pick up where we last left off our James Bond discussion. So Spencer, my dear friend, welcome.
Oh, thank you for such a great introduction. And yes, we're finally going to try and get this finished.
Yes, I think we started sometime mid last year. And since then, I think I've been talking a little bit about Bond on my channel, and I know you've been talking quite a bit in a great way about Bond on your channel. So that's really wonderful. Just before we get started, could you just give us some updates as to your own James Bond film discussions or maybe Ian Fleming discussions on your channel?
Yeah, I'd always planned on doing Bond related materials because, of course, anybody who knows me, if I can find a way, just my head naturally finds Bond relations to anything. And my channel name is from Star Wars, but Bond has been even longer within Star Wars. So I've always thought, well, I'm gonna do a lot of Bond content, so maybe I should have had a Bond related name. I don't know if that's going to confuse people, but I just went with it. And so what I started doing was I didn't know where to start because I had just so many thoughts in my head. And then I had done a number of audio commentaries. So I decided to start doing them for the Bond films. So I've been working my way through steadily. I just did the one for The Spy Who Loved Me. So I'm halfway through the original films. And yeah, it's been very interesting. And of course, I do those very no frills. So when you listen to one of those, it's just me, and I don't prepare anything, and I just go in cold, and it's a very interesting experience trying to do that, and just doing it by yourself. And then I finished one of those, and like I finished the one recording for Spy, and I clicked end, and I'm like, I didn't even cover half the things I wanted to cover. So yeah, that's the other thing with those. And it's like, I don't know how professional guys do this for a living, man. It's a lot harder than it looks, but it's a lot of fun. And I've actually had several instances where I've had new thoughts occur to me because I'm doing like a piece of scene analysis, and I go like really in depth on it, and I'm like, oh wait, oh, and as I'm talking into a microphone, I'm like, oh yeah, and if you follow this thought thread a bit further. So that's been really interesting too. So I think that's probably the most rewarding thing out of doing one of those. But that's what I'm in the middle of right now. And the trouble is finding the time to be able to sit down and have an uninterrupted thing, because when you try to do a rough sync, it's very hard to if you have to stop or take a break or something, to then edit out the pause and try and get the sync back, because the idea is people can watch these along with a copy of the film if they so choose. But yeah, it's been really interesting, really rewarding, and I'm going to try and get through the rest of the series within a reasonable amount of time.
Were there any specific examples of, say, moments or scenes or other elements of the Bond films you've discussed so far that, for example, you mentioned it before, something came up that was maybe new or fresh to you as you were doing the commentaries? What were some of the examples of that for you from some of the films you've been talking about so far?
Of course, now I say that, and now I'm trying to think off the top of my head, and I'm like, well, what was it? I can't remember. But just for example, on the spy track, I was talking about something I had noticed before, and then it suddenly dawned on me it wasn't just in one place. So what's cool about Spy is that it has this element of it maintains an element of mystery throughout because it's a mystery to solve. And if you look at the editing, there's a number of really cool, well, this goes hand in hand with the storytelling, but there's a number of really cool reveal twists in a way. Like things are set up, but then they are to be different. The Bond and Anya relationship is developed over time, and it's a series of reveals. Jaws is revealed, and then we get the reveal of submarine tracking system, and we get the reveals of every contact Bond goes to. It doesn't get him to the submarine tracking system, and then when they finally get it, it's actually worthless. But then it builds to the ultimate reveal when we finally get to what was even by then the classic Bond villain meeting once the plot has been exposed and Bond is brought to Stromberg on the Leparis, and it's the key line of the movie, which was what would have made audiences in 77 go, wow, we haven't seen this before. It's when Bond asks, how much do you want? Whatever do you mean, Mr. Bond? The price for not firing those missiles. And then we realize for the first time Bond is actually facing a villain who is completely insane and there's no way to reach him. So that's the chilling, cold, striking aspect of Spy that I think maybe a little lost on people now if they're not really looking at it, because that hadn't been seen until that time. That was that new factor, how they made Stromberg and the traditional villain plot to cause global destruction different. That this for the first time, even though you can make the argument previous villains had of course been insane in ways, they weren't completely gone. There is no way of reaching Stromberg. He just has the means financially, and he has the resources and a private army that nobody knows about to act on all this stuff he has in his head. So that, I think, all of those nice little reveals and plot twists throughout the film really build up to that, and then you get to that moment and it's like, oh wow, so how are we going to get out of this one? And then they build on that and sort of, for lack of a better term, sort of redo it in Moonraker, because Moonraker uses a lot. It basically takes this Spy playbook and just revamps it and just turns some things around and builds on literally the movie that had come before.
So I think that's wonderful, and I am. Maybe before we move on, let me just ask a very specific Spy question, which is: did Bond mean to extend his hand to shake Stromberg's hand on purpose?
Yes, I actually covered that in the commentary. I've always felt that. And because Naomi specifically says, Mr. Stromberg prefers not to shake hands. And it's one of the few times in the movie that they make reference to the webbed fingers, which you only see, like the thumb part here. And it's when Stromberg's hands are on the console. And then, of course, you see that 2 or 3 times before that. And of course, it's very quick. So when I was a kid, I didn't notice that. When I was watching Spy the first several hundred times. But when Bond goes in and he's undercover, but he still puts his hand out because he knows that's a way to at first start to prod or probe Stromberg or try and put him off to make him divulge some information. And then immediately does the I don't shake hands. What is this? But I think also what inspires Bond to do that is not just that he has been told not to do that, but right before Stromberg comes in, Bond catches glimpse and sees the last remnants of the poor secretary. He sees the forearm with the hand in the aquarium portal. We immediately think, oh crap, the shark left some scraps, So that's not something you see every day. So automatically it's like, okay, now I know for sure I see something that's really not right. It's somebody's hand just in an aquarium tank.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never thought about that, but the shark left some bits behind. So maybe he wasn't that hungry that day. I'm not sure, but Or maybe he
He's
was
a
saving
messy
it for
eater.
later. Yeah, maybe perhaps. But yeah, that's a good point. And that's interesting because I was always wondering about that look that we see on Roger Moore's face after Stromberg does that thing with his hands. It might have been on purpose. It might have been he just forgot. Maybe he was suddenly stunned by seeing the bits of the person out there in the water. But that's a good point, and it he is known, Bond is, for trying to unsettle his the people that he's with and the people that he suspects might be up to no good. So that's a really good point. That's really excellent. So Spy Who Loved Me. So when is the Moonraker commentary going to take place, do you think? Probably.
Hopefully pretty soon. I've usually been able to do the recording sometime during the weekends, and then get it uploaded pretty soon. So I've been trying to do one a week, sometimes one every 2 weeks. Just depending on time. But I'm trying to keep it a steady pace so that way I can stay on track and get through all of them, because admittedly when I first came up with the idea, I'm like, oh yeah, that'll be fun, and I can do that. And then I had forgotten, just how taxing it can be to do one of those and find the time and not have any interruptions. And then it is a little bit nerve wracking actually, because you're speaking along with the film live, and it's a running commentary. So if you try not to make any mistakes, and you try to it's very difficult to keep your train of thought and go along with the film, and then also talk about production stuff and try and have a mix. So it really makes you even better appreciate like the really great commentators who have done so many great tracks on Laserdisc and DVD and Blu-ray and 4K. Like all, it makes you once again appreciate how difficult it is.
What were some of those examples of what you consider to be the great commentary tracks for Bond films, for
Oh
example?
goodness, there. I mean, really, all of them are fantastic. I really started kicking myself because I always knew commentary tracks were available once we all got into DVD and Blu-ray and things. But like most people, you don't necessarily have the time to sit and watch the entire film a second or third time. And so I would select pieces, or listen to them in chunks. And it's like, well, it's a lot of the same information covered in the documentaries. But when I finally started listening to them entirely and really focusing on those, they go into more detail than the documentaries, really, because they have more time to play with, more pieces of the interviews conducted. So it's for the official ones. For Dr. No Through License to Kill, what you get is basically all of the materials done by John Cork and his team for the documentaries, just expanded upon. Of course, you don't have the visuals, but I mean, they're so important because a lot of the interviewees are unfortunately no longer with us, so it's still a great primary source. So there's all of those. It's maybe hard to rank them, although I've thought about doing it before. But I just kind of view those as like one long commentary track. And then of course the Criterion Laserdisc commentaries, those are treasures, because everybody talks about, oh well, they got the discs banned because they're too unpolitically correct, and they go way into all this stuff. And when you listen to them, it's like, well, no, not really. It was just because Cubby Broccoli was like, they did what's a commentary, because it was a new idea, a new concept to most people. By 1991, even Criterion had been doing it a number of years, but most studios still weren't doing them, and most people were not aware of the idea of a commentary as an extra feature. So, but of course, again, the primary people talking were the people who were there at the beginning. And again, who for several individuals shortly thereafter were no longer with us. I mean, it's still, every time I listen to those, when they mentioned that it was literally they were recorded, and then the From Russia with Love, they dedicated to Richard Maybaum, who literally passed away like not even 2 weeks after recording those. And his sections in particular, because he gets quoted in things, but in some vintage interview pieces, but his input is so vital to the series, and just being able to hear him and Terrence Young and Peter Hunt, and just really go into detail and enjoy the recollecting this stuff. And there's no sort of filtering, and it's just literally them talking. There's no editing for time and clarity, which again is helpful, and you need that in commentaries, but this is something different. It's like imagining the being able to go to Terrence Young's house and just pick his brain like we all wanted to, but we never got the chance to. So those are the most special, along with the Roger Moore commentaries, which are again just absolute treasures. And I think it speaks to not only his nature and his goodwill, but also his consistent championing of the Bond series, that he actually sat down and did a full commentary for all of his films, which is something I really wish Connery had done. I thought that would have been great. I would love if all of the actors did. Pierce Brosnan did one for Die Another Day, although it was a half track. But I still, because of that, and because those are so rewarding, I would still love it. Like, say, they George Lazenby to do one. I'm sure it would be game for it. Just can you imagine just him watching the film and talking about, oh, I was a handsome looking bastard then, wasn't I? Or especially, I would love to hear Dalton, just even if it was Dalton just for like an entire commentary track going into the acting process of just one element. I mean, it would be fascinating. The little bits we got in the Everything or Nothing documentary were just gripping, and I'm like, no, can we just have like 5 hours of that? That was like, oh, like when that little bit when he's like, some people don't think we're ready for me, but I always like a challenge. I'm like, oh, like that's it. Oh, that's great. And then I have to mention, Pierce Brosnan just did that. It was really cool, even though he's obviously not very good at doing commentaries, because it is a nerve-wracking thing. But they did that. He did the live stream commentary on YouTube for Goldeneye, which was really cool. And of course, he's like, oh, I'm just in my Hawaiian house. It's very pretty out here. Yeah, so not trying to rub it in. But so that was, I really appreciated that. That was a really nice thing for him to do. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, I mean, they're so rewarding, and I wish more people would take the time to go into it. But I know it's not always the most fun to sit down and watch the movie, practically muted, and listen to people just talking over it. But what I started doing years ago was actually extracting the commentaries and putting them on a portable music player, so that way I could just carry them around with me. And it takes a little figuring out how to do it, using various software and stuff. But that's what really makes me able to get through a lot of commentaries, is I literally just walk around on headphones sometimes. And I remember when I first started doing it, I had done the Bond commentaries and the Batman commentaries, so I'm walking around with I remember when I was in college walking somewhere and somebody's like, what are you listening to? I was like, oh, I have Tim Burton in my head. And they didn't believe me. And I'm like, well, okay, here's my headphones. And they put it on. They're like, what do you mean? And so I hit play, and it's like, so I was actually terrified of Jack Palance. So Jack really helped me out on that, because he came on the set and he was just like really terrifying. So I didn't know really how to give him directions, but we made it through it, I think. I'm not really what you would call an action director, but I think it turned out pretty okay. So stuff like that. So yeah, if you want to really get into more commentaries, if you can take the time. Again, it takes a little tech know-how, but if you start literally just extracting the AC3 file and converting it to MP3 or FLAC or WAV or whatever, and just I even listen to them in my car driving around, like, so that may be a super nerdy thing to do, but it's actually really fun, and a lot of people listen to podcasts while they're driving now. So I listened. I have a whole archive now. It's just, I have a whole folder of like a couple hundred commentaries that I've done this for, and like anytime I get a new release or something and it's got a commentary, I'm like, oh cool, I got to remember to do that so I can listen to that on the go.
Yeah, I understand completely what you say about listening to commentaries separately and listening to them on one's earphones, much like listening to a podcast. You're absolutely right. And you can imagine what the scene is
Yes.
as they're talking about it. Yeah, it's most definitely. Yeah. So you should do I would love to get a video on your channel where you rank all the commentary tracks for all the Bond films. I think that would be so awesome. I'd love to see that.
I've thought about it. I think I will. Thank you for the encouragement. I
I,
didn't
I
know if it might be too much of a specialty thing. I'm like, well, there's so many Bond ranking videos, like, but maybe I'd love to do some that are like very specific, like, top commentaries or best sound mixes or best Bond film editing, ranked or something.
or like best Bond DVD documentary moments or something like that.
Yes, yes, or
Something.
best
I don't know.
best video package, like in terms of the whole supplemental
Yeah.
collection or stuff like that. Yeah,
I think
hey,
for
that
me
would be
it would
different.
be yeah, I think for me it would be maybe for the DVD documentaries it would be the moment where um maybe Patrick McNee spoke on camera for his for the film of You to a Kill, because all the way up to then you'd always hear his voice, but suddenly you'd see his face and talk, but it was this really shocking, in a great way, shocking moment that I
Because
really
doesn't he
loved. Yeah.
narrate? He narrates the Aptec one as well, and then all
Yeah.
of a sudden it cuts to his interview footage, and
Wait,
so it's like it's
who
the in
narrates?
joke.
Does he is he narrating it, or someone else narrating the um there's that is it who, like a British, I don't know who it is. It's a British woman's voice. Is it for one of them when they switch over? I forget, but
Yeah, I think so, because they used like you said, it's like a British woman's voice. I think they used in several instances. It's like on the commentaries, like the first few are narrated by, or I guess narrated by John Cork, and then for a number of them it switches over in voice. So you go to the next one and all of a sudden it's a different voice, and it's like, hello, I'm David Naylor, and I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, yeah. And actually, I like that they changed voices on the commentaries, because it does sort of keep them from getting a little stale. Because otherwise, if you listen to them all in pretty close order, like I usually do, it sounds like literally one unending thing. Because they have the narration in between the interview pieces, so I actually like the different narrations on the commentaries even.
oh, that's a really good point in terms of the variety. I never really thought of it that way, but now that I hear you say that, I agree with that. So that's a really excellent point. Well said.
Oh,
Uh,
actually, while we're still on that, I remember one more
yeah.
thing I should mention. I forgot. Probably it's one of the best tracks that they've done. The one on Tomorrow Never Dies is pretty good with Roger Spottiswoode and I forget the other guy. It's his friend he's talking to, but that's a nice conversation. And then Michael Apted's track on The World's Not Enough is really great. But one of the best ones is the one of the simplest. It's the one for Goldeneye, where it's Martin Campbell and Michael G. Wilson just having a conversation, and they cut up and they make jokes, and it's like, this is when we got to St. Petersburg. Yeah, you remember how miserable it was when we did this location? And then, like, there was that one day, weren't you shouting a lot? And he was like, it was a tough day. So I love that one.
Michael G. Wilson's really, I think he's very candid on
Oh
the
yes.
commentary tracks that he's on. I find it very refreshing, actually. Yeah, the ones also, what was it for? You mentioned Spy Who Loved Me
Yes,
and
yes, the
Moonraker.
like
Yeah.
round table where it's him and Ken Adam and Lewis Gilbert and then Christopher Wood, and it's just again very informal, which is just like it's catnip for Bond fans.
Yeah. So that's and as you say, there's a variety of who's participating, and it adds, I think, a lot of flavor and a lot of yeah, a lot of spice, I suppose. If you're, especially if you're going to listen to all of them in succession. So, but in any event, we look forward, Spencer, to your ranking video. I think the more the maybe, yeah, anything on commentaries or documentaries, the better, because I think those are a lot of fun, and they are in their own ways very rich with information and a lot of details that I think a lot of Bond fans would really appreciate. So looking forward to
Absolutely.
that one. But I suppose this is great because this leads me to uh, the topic of the day, right? You started mentioning about The Spy Who Loved Me, and we went about commentaries. You were mentioning that you're talking about Spy Who Loved Me, and you're going to talk about Moonraker very soon. You also mentioned, as an example, the idea of Stromberg and his very quite shocking, perhaps, uh, megalomaniacal behavior, which, as you indicate, might seem to be very unique from a Bond villain perspective up to now, anyway, which I think is a really great observation. But it brings me to the general question, which was the last time we spoke about Bond films, we were going to talk about Bond villains, but unfortunately we weren't able to. So today I'd like to speak a little bit, or a lot if possible, about the Bond villain take and your views on the Bond villains. And I think we can do this in a number of ways. I think we can start with what are your favorite villains here and there. But what I thought might be, just let's just go to the heart of the matter, which is, if we think about the Bond villains categorized in, say, the blocks of the films, the early Sean Connery films up through, let's say that, there's of course Guy Hamilton there, but the Terrence Young era plus, and then we have a little bit of Lewis Gilbert in there as well, and then George Lazenby, and then we have we have the eras that I think can be subdivided in any way that we see fit, and I think we've done so on past occasions. But what I'd like to get a sense of, Spencer, is what are some of your favorite. Let's think about it. Maybe not. We can think about it in a number of ways. What are your favorite villains, or who are your favorite villains, main villains, hench persons, etc. Or we could think about it in terms of villain moments. What were some of those key moments from a particular film that you thought was especially noteworthy, or especially something that people should pay attention to, or that kind of thing? You talked about Stromberg and this little mention, this little meeting uh, with Bond early and also later on the tanker. So, and those are key moments strategically for Bond, but also setting up Stromberg in terms of how really far gone he is in terms of his villain plan. But let's start with the early period, Spencer. So take it away. You can answer it as you like, but what are some of those favorite villain moments for you, or your favorite villains? Or what are some of those key moments that you think are for you very iconic and very important, but maybe might fly below the radars of other Bond fans and Bond film watchers? What are some of those villain moments for you? And let's start from the early period, and I'll try to chime in when I can. But take it away, my friend.
Okay. Gosh, that's it sounds like such a simple question, but for somebody like me, I'm like, well, just one of those, like I could probably go 6 hours on, if I get your pick. Of course, we're still trying to finish, so I'm also like, I want to make sure we get through every question this time because, as we discussed before, if it's Bond, I get started. I get started. So, yeah, I think it's a good idea going sort of like chronologically. And like you said, it's best to, you can try and come up with the whole notion of eras, but it's really helpful to sort of just go and, like you said, and like the little blocks chronologically. I guess I should make special mention. It's a little bit of a cheat, but I have to mention it because he's so amazing and iconic. And it's honestly a shame he never got to do an official, Eon film. But Peter Lorre playing Le Chiffre and the Casino Royale television adaptation. I mean, you know, laugh all you want at the changes they had to make and the fact that it was live television into, an hour time slot, 1954. But for what it is, it's amazing it survived. But you get to see Peter Lorre playing Fleming's first major villain. I mean, that alone is just a treasure. And of course the unfortunate gag where he because it was live television and mistakes did happen, where when the sheep gets killed and then you just see him get up and walk away. And like supposedly he starts trying to light a cigarette, just like standing off camera, and then everybody's like, oh wait, no, you're still on camera, no, move. And of course he was an extraordinarily professional actor, and so I'm sure that must have completely been embarrassing, but that was live television. But in the main scenes at the card table, and then they do it, of course they don't do the torture sequence, but they do a version of it. And even though it's very much abridged, it's still really amazing to see Peter Lorre doing Casino Royale. So that my first thought was, well, if you want to talk about under the flying under the radar, that's a prime example. And of course, he could have played Le Chiffre in a real, Eon Casino Royale, or he could have easily played a villain, in one of the official films. So in a way, it's sort of seeing like one of the early discussions for a Bond film in the 50s, when Fleming and McClory and everybody else was coming up with all the various ideas during the process of making what became the Thunderball script. So when you read Battle for Bond and you see all the detailed notes of all the casting ideas they had, it's like, oh, so in a sort of way, this like might be the proto 50s Bond villain we never got, seeing Peter Lorre play it. So I really love that he did that. So then going into the official films, again, I could make the case for all of them. So I guess I should. I guess the easiest thing to do is like maybe just spotlight some. So for me, actually, the more and more I think about it over the years, I think even though he's not in the film all that much, every appearance he has, his main appearance is so effective because it's built up through the entire film. Is Dr. No, and I think he may actually be my personal favorite of the primary on-screen lead villains because he's so effective. Joseph Weissman's performance is just every move is calculated with this menace, and he has this gaze. He's like, his eyes are like boring holes into Connery's face. And the whole dinner scene, the back and forth dialogue is so multi-layered with different meanings, and it's such a richly textured scene that it really doesn't you don't really get the full impact until you've seen the entire series, and then you go back and you look at, okay, yeah, I know this was the first time, but look at how expressive it is and how rich it is. And when you read the same passage in Fleming's novel, it has that same charge, but it's amazing to see how they got that on the screen transposed, because they did alter something. Dr. No in the film doesn't have steel pincers for hands, and they actually get most of the backstory in, although they miss some of the really cool Fleming bits, like the why his hands were removed is different, and how he was shot in the chest and left to die with his hands cut off for being a thief. But just because his heart was on the on the opposite side of the body, he didn't die. So then he decides to go become a doctor and renames himself Julius for my father and no for my rejection of him, which is a line I've always loved. It just stuck with me. But they got the same meaning down perfectly. And again, it's all in the performance and the way that Connery handles himself. The Bond's dialogue delivery is just, I mean, it's amazing. The constant back and forth, and nothing unsettles either player, and each one knows the stakes they're playing for. All the while, you have the aquarium behind Dr. No with that one piece of process footage that Peter Hunt had to keep cutting away from because it was only like a minute long, which they talk about in the Criterion commentary was a real headache. Um, and the added joke gag with the stolen Goya Duke of Wellington painting, and then Honey's there, and Bond finds a way to get her removed from the situation, but it doesn't go the way he planned. And then the ultimate thing for the audience, for real Bond fans, when Dr. No spots I'm not a fool, so please do not take me for one. And that table knife, please put it back. And of course, if you read the novel and you were a fan, you knew Bond got that to escape Dr. No's obstacle maze. And it's like, oh no, he doesn't have the knife now. He doesn't have the table lighter. Like, how's he getting out of this? And they do the same thing in From Russia with Love, when Red Grant removes the cigarette case, which is what deflects the bullet when the train goes into the tunnel in the novel. So there's a few little fun things like that to even throw the novel fans, the Fleming fans, to give them extra suspense, because they come in, oh, I know what's going to happen. No, you don't exactly. But yeah, that whole scene, it has such an impact. And again, Wiseman has such potency on screen because mystery, and that just makes his appearance all the more exciting, because we've the closest glimpse we have before that is the scene just before, when we see the door open and we see the shoes, we see the first appearance of the like Chairman Mao style outfit, and when he goes and observes Bond, it's really creepy. And then you see the mechanical hand come down into frame, and we see that really close, and it's like, whoa, who is this guy really? And Bond has penetrated his organization and done all this stuff. So it's a fantastically rich scene. We get so many elements of the high life as well. All the dial. That's a Dom Perignon 55. Pity to break it. I prefer the 53 myself. Which of course, as a kid, I took down almost like in notes. So still to this day, I would love to try. Even though I don't drink, I still want to try Dom Perignon 53, although I know by now it must be astronomical in price, if any still survives. But there, and then even in the dialogue, there's brilliant moments, like everybody remembers the exchanges about the magnifying effect of the glass and the aquarium. $1 million, Mr. Bond. You were wondering how much it cost. As a matter of fact, I was. But then a little bit later in the dialogue, when they're already sort of having the traditional back and forth, and they're pushing each other, and they're sort of enjoying this duel of words. But when Dr. No says, the glass is convex, 10 inches thick, which accounts for the magnifying effect, which of course was to explain why they had this little bit of process footage with really big fish. But then it gave them the ability to have that amazing reply from Bond. Minnows pretending they're whales, just like you on this island, Dr. No. And it's like, and then the reply comes, it depends, Mr. Pond, upon which side of the glass you are. And it's like, and that's the perfect note to strike. And that becomes the template for every version of that scene to follow. But because it's the first one, because it's been built up to over the whole film, there's this energy, there's an electric quality there. And again, Dr. No is not doesn't have the most screen time of all the villains, but very much in the way that the unseen Blofeld in From Russia with Love and Thunderball is, for me, the most effective Blofeld, because that element of being shrouded in mystery and it is what makes them so exciting, and you don't exactly know what they're going to do, and it keeps you interested, and there's that element of danger. So that's something I think is very key. You have to establish the villain is being dangerous, which we do by seeing all of the vast machine organization of Dr. No. We see it with the killing of Strangways and Mary Trueblood, which of course she's not really named in the film. And we see how Bond has to escape many murder attempts, and he frustrates Dr. No. I was curious to see what sort of man you are. You damaged my organization and my pride. Like, it's that nice human element, which is really cool. So yeah, again, even though it's setting up a lot of stuff that was going to be done over and over and over again, it's just amazing to see it for the first time. And again, I think it has this electric quality to it. And so for me, the more and more I reflect on it, I really think that again, I can't really, it's hard to say, oh, this is my absolute favorite and I love this one, I think it's better than all the others, because again, I could make the case for all of them. But I think Dr. No is special in that way. And I think that you know people always think, oh, it's the first film, and they just go with it. But they'll always talk about it doesn't have the iconography, isn't all there yet. We don't have the John Barry score. We don't have the pre-title sequence. We don't have all the things people expect. And so maybe they don't always look at Dr. No in the same way because it was the first film and it is a little bit different. But it's that difference that I really love. I think makes it special. And of course, it is the first film. So I know that was a long answer.
No, that's great. I have to follow up then. So I think one of the great things I love that scene when they're eating and they're at that table, and you're absolutely right about their positioning with Dr. No in the foreground and in the background, and then Honey and Bond are sitting on the side. So unlike, say, Scaramanga and Bond later, Bond is relegated to a side position on the table. So there's already a visual type of inequality that's established. Although Bond, I think, of course, as we know, I think establishes his equal footing quite confidently, as he always does. But I think one of the things too is that even at the end, Dr. No is the first to go and fight Bond physically. I mean, he's really frustrated, but he doesn't cower. He doesn't hide behind any of his bodyguards or whatever. He
gets in there, exactly. And you can see the anger on his face. And that's the same thing that I love about Largo and Thunderball, that he leads his men. And then one of the best single shots in the entire series is at the climax of the underwater battle. And the rhythm of the editing is really built up, and John Barry's score is really going full tilt. And that moment when Largo kills a guy with a knife, turns around with the knife, and you see the blood coming off of it. You can, of course, he's got the big face mask with the tubes. So you can almost, like, if they were on land, you would just see him just like, like, I got that guy. And it's like he's turning around and he knows Bond is somewhere coming up. It's just like, oh. And then of course when Bond does come up, Largo has the knife. He does the little hand toss, and it's just like, oh, you really feel it. And I think Largo actually is my favorite villain in terms of that physical engagement, because of all the Connery era villains, because Connery is so physically viable. It's the reason why they changed the ending of Diamonds Are Forever, because they realized a fight to the death in the salt mine with Blofeld, you couldn't have Charles Gray fight Sean Connery in that context. Fisticuffs to the death. It would be death. It would be ridiculous. They all admitted that. It's like you couldn't do it. It wouldn't work. But Largo, I think, Dr. No and Largo, I think, are the most physically, there. And of course, they do fight Bond with fist, in the climax. But Largo, especially with the personal motivation of, okay, he's lost the battle, he's lost the bombs, he's lost Domino, he's been, he's Spectre's #1 guy, and now he's been thwarted at every turn by this and he's not even like going after Bond as being, you know, the enemy of Spectre like he says earlier. He's now like it's a matter of revenge is what it is. Like he's, you know, his entire life has been destroyed in that sense. So, you know, like when he gets the drop on Bond at the very end, he gets the gun on him, just that smile that comes across Adolfo Celli's face is just, and you're like, okay, yeah, Bond's had it here. And it's that's why the, you know, it's perfect timing on Domino's part there.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And Largo is, as you say, very physical. He gets in a few punches there at the end, and he also, I must say, going back to Doctor No, he does some steering, some very serious steering at the end there with the boat. Not uh, very much like what Sean Connery does in Doctor No and his driving there, but
Oh,
yeah.
I love his acting in that. And of course, there's a process screen, but
Yeah.
Sean is doing it so hard in that
Yes.
little Sunbeam Alpine, and the way he looks around, and even though the depth isn't quite there, she can obviously tell the black hearse is a process shot. But that moment where when he first looks in the rear view mirror, he is acting 200% there with that. He gets that look that he has earlier in the phone booth when he exposes Mr. Jones and is like, forgive me if I'm a few minutes late.
Yeah.
And he hangs up, and he's not even looking at the phone. He's just staring a hole through the window. Like, Mr. Jones is not long for this world. So he has that same look comes back when he looks in the rearview mirror. And of course, again, he's on a process stage. It's really hard to act in those situations, but he's given it 250%. And it's just, oh, it's so beautiful. But
I would have loved to have
very
seen
hard steering.
Yeah, I would have loved to have seen Largo's face, because we only see him from his back. So we just see him. There's one moment where he does a little thing where he's like going like that, and you'd love to have seen him from the front in his face. But before we go on, I must ask. So Doctor No, right? A lot, of course, is about the name and about the buildup and the Ken Adam, the dome and the shadow and pick it up and the spider, of course, and
Tonight.
Exactly. And the title is Doctor No. It's very much like Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, or even a film like Citizen Kane or King Kong. Even, you know, the name is it's in the title, and everyone is talking about this person or this.
It's like Goldfinger.
Exactly, this character. Yes. Exactly. Even within the James Bond films, exactly. So I have to ask you then, and even a file,
Yes,
you know,
it's so dramatic.
Exactly, it's so menacing.
And it's just like you see Crab Key, and you're like, oh, what's his Crab Key? Like, okay, and that's already planted in your head, and then you see the Doctor No file, and it's like, oh, now we're really getting into it. Like, that's the title of the movie.
Exactly.
And then immediate transition with that. And everybody, you know, complains about the Bonnie Norman score, but I actually, it's really effective.
It is.
It's every cue is in the right place. And it's maybe a bit more old fashioned. Yeah, Terrence Young always called it. He gave me a bunch of mining disaster music. We had to do the placement was really difficult. So I mean, you know, but that's the art of music editing, you know, and finding the right placement. And it really works so well. They use a tiny piece of it in From Russia with Love, which probably made John Barry tear his hair out. But you know, and it works there. You're like all of a sudden, wait, that's the Dr. No music.
Yeah. I have to ask to the where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So what is your favorite Dr. No mention? In other words, so many characters mention Dr. No's name. It even happens in From Russia with Love. Right, character,
which is great continuity.
Exactly.
It's a nice touch, you know.
So, what is your favorite Dr. No mention? Because so many characters say it. So, what is your favorite character moment when they say the name Dr. No?
Gosh, that's a hard question. Well, I guess the what you have to say is the probably the most dramatic one is at Postfellers, when you know it's like, you know, like no, that island belongs to a Chinese gentleman. Of course, Felix gets cut off by, you know, Little Miss Freelance, and then, you know, and then once all that's done, and then, you know, run away, little freelance. And Felix is just completely amused by Bond's handling of the situation, although Quirrell almost gets blinded by a flashbulb. I mean, that's pretty
Right,
intense.
yeah.
You know, one resistor, one takes cyanide, one resistor arm being broken, neither would talk. Who puts that sort of scare into people? And I think it's about time we found out. Look, you were talking about Crab Key. What's so special about it? Why can't we go over there? As I said, belongs to a Chinese gentleman. You know, he won't allow anybody to land, go near the place. And then the dialogue is once again building this character up. You're like, well, who is this guy? And then none of the local fishermen go near the place. And then Quirrell expresses his own trepidation. And then for somebody like Quirrell to say, I won't go there. And then that I think that factor really is what sells Bond on. Okay, I think this must be my next port of call. Like this is where I need to go. If even Quirrell is spooked by this place, and then it's like, what else do we know about him? Nothing much, just his name. And then there's that slight pause, Doctor No, and the way Jack Lord does it, and then we get the transition. So that being the last words of that scene, it's like, oh, and then we go right into the failed attempt again of the three blind mice, although they're trying to shoot Bond from across the street with a handgun. It's like, with a silencer on it. And then that's another great Peter Hunt. I fixed this by he didn't have any shot of a car going, so he flashes the negative and to give the effect of a car speeding by, and they put the effect on the soundtrack. And you wouldn't know that unless you hear him talking about it. And then when you do, it's like, oh my God, that's ingenious. like that's, oh my God. Yeah. Why didn't you get a medal? that's just, but yeah,
It's yeah.
that would be my answer.
That's amazing. Yeah, you're absolutely right to mention that moment, that flash moment. It's so it comes and goes really quickly, but the thought that went into that, it's really
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And also I love that moment too about how their attempt to assassinate Bond is thwarted. And so the guy has to just console the, it's okay, don't worry
He's
about
like,
it. It's
oh
just
man.
yeah, don't
It's
worry
like,
about it.
we'll
They have
get
to
him
console each
again.
other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. So that's a great moment. Yes, of course, the very classic Felix Leiter, Dr. No moment. Yeah, I love it. I love the bit too when Sean Connery says it during the dinner scene when he's talking about how this is you'll find it's a small naked little island, Dr. No or something. So but the name is so wonderful, and just the more people say it, it becomes legendary. So you're absolutely right. But so Dr. No, fantastic. But let's continue on as far as we can. So moving through as many as we can. So what are some of those other villain moments? Some classic key scenes or key bits of dialogue or little bits of atmosphere
okay,
that you
well,
think are
the big one I haven't mentioned yet, because it's always hard because it's technically under the henchman category, because of the character's placement in like the villain hierarchy. But the big one, like you have the Dr. No dinner table scene, and then the other big one. And it's kind of hard when your most dramatic scene is in your second movie. And that's what you always have to live up to. But of course, it's um the first one won't kill you, not the second, not even the third, not till you crawl over here and you kiss my foot. Yeah, it's Red Grant, the entirety of Red Grant, because again, building the mystery, they specifically keep him silent through the entire film. And then when he kills the actual Nash, which is always humorous, it's like, oh, let's have a recognition code. Oh, you want to go to the bathroom? It's like, sure, okay, why not? But again, all of that is kept silent. And Peter Hunt lays over and foley's up the sound of the train and the steam coming out. So we see him go up to Nash, and we don't know how he identifies himself. And then when he and Bond interact again, we don't hear it, and we see the cigarette case come out, and it's like, oh my God, he knows the recognition code. Oh my God. And then but then you don't hear anything. And it's only when they actually get on the train, you hear the first time Grant speaks, he does it in that characterization he's come up with, and it's like, Nash, Captain Nash. No, I only got him wire an hour ago. And you're like, whoa, his cover is so good. And you see Bond buying it. And it's like, oh no. Oh no, this is the Spectre's plan has gotten to the point. Kronstein's planning is so uh, intricate that they even have the MI6 recognition code, and Grant has a whole profile of a MI6 agent. So they've come up with this whole characterization of this English spy, and he plays it to the hilt. But it's interesting to note that because it's the first time we hear him speaking, we're so uneasy. We also have that uneasiness, and you can look at what Grant does as Nash, and there's certain little things that are weird, and that's what starts to clue Bond in. And of course, the line "red wine with fish," I should have told me something. uh, it wasn't just that, and that's why Bond does the whole business of sending them to the restaurant car, and he checks Nash's briefcase, and it's the standard kit, because something is alarm bells are going off in his head. Something's not quite right, but he can't put his finger on it. And Nash has all the answers. He has M's orders, um, but the entire sequence, the entire performance, it's just absolutely riveting. And again, even though Grant, like Dr. No, doesn't have the most screen time in the world, because it's been built up and we've seen him, I've been your guardian angel, saved your life at the gypsy camp. It's just like, and then the unfolding of the mystery at that point, because we've seen him, but we didn't know exactly what the Kronstein's plan meant until we get the full reveal. And Bond also sees how he's humiliated himself and completely failed and is going to die for it. So you have me deliver it on a plate. That's brilliant. And we see that on his face, and that makes the scene even more effective. And then Grant gets pleasure out of this. I get enjoyment of seeing the great James Bond realize what a bloody fool he's made of himself. And then you see the headlines, and he literally smiles. It's just like, oh, like that entire notion of performance. And again, it gets across a lot of the backstory Fleming created, because they couldn't do that in the film. But when you read the From Russia with Love novel, although it has its differences, I mean, Grant's backstory is that's a book in and of itself, But it's very bizarre in places, Like as a child, he realized he was a serial killer who was affected by the phases of the moon, and he liked killing so much he just literally went over to across the border and defected to the Russians, and literally walked in and be like, "Hi, I'd like to kill people for you. I hear you kill people." Even though the Russians are so taken aback, they're like, are you insane? And then they're like, yeah, he's probably insane. Should we kill him? Well, I think maybe we have a vacancy somewhere. I think we have a vacancy, a job posting that the requirement is likes to kill people. We didn't think we could fill it. You know, that sort of weird bureaucratic reaction that Fleming came up with, I think, is just incredible. But of course, in the film, it's Spectre, so you just sort of, once you read the novel, it's impossible to not read some of that stuff into the film. And I think that even enhances Robert Charles' performance, because I'm sure that's what he was acting off of, because I'm pretty sure he had read the novel anyway. But, and of course, talking about physical match for Bond, I mean, that fight sequence is just still unmatched. And again, it's been built up to across the entire film. The whole film hinges on that scene. And of course, in the novel, that's the end of the main plot. Like, as soon as that finishes on the train, it just cuts to Bond confronting Rosa Club in the hotel. The film has to invent all this extra business to have a full action climax. But it's so powerful, and it's the most dramatic scene in the series. So it's hard to top. You can't really top it. You can only maybe equal it. So that's the gold standard, as it were. Of course, not being a pun on Goldfinger, but yeah, that's the big one. That's the big one, along with Dr. No. I think those two are like the key core elements of what these relationships are supposed to be, and then you just have variations of that from then on. And then the next one, of course, would be the laser scene in Goldfinger with the iconic lines that everybody knows. You expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. Um, but then they never quote the next line. There's nothing you can talk to me about that I don't already know, which is just as important because it's like, yeah, you're right. It's like, so Bond's ingenuity comes into play. That's what saves him. He has to manipulate Goldfinger into thinking that he still has relevant information, and if Goldfinger kills him, then MI6 will act on that information that they supposedly already have, when in actuality they have nothing, which is what Bond tries earlier in Doctor No. It's like, I sent a full report. Bluff, Mr. Bond. You've not contacted your government, and since you requested a Geiger counter, it's, but again, it's that notion of bluff and double bluff, and constantly trying to play the villain and psychologically manipulate their reactions, and try to break down their defenses. So again, it's a battle of wits, which is really key to any Bond villain. And if you don't have that, then you're going to be a very boring villain. So yeah, again, I'm trying. I should probably start moving through, because otherwise we'll be here all day. And I want to make sure to get through all your questions this time. But so yeah, and Goldfinger is phenomenal, and it's amazing because the entire performance, except for like one or two little pieces, is dubbed, and you wouldn't even know it. It's one of the most expert dubbings ever done. Michael Collins did the voice, and of course Gert Frobe played Goldfinger. But the way that he plays menace and nonchalance is really, really striking. So the during the golf game, the sort of amusement he has when he's winning, and then when he's losing, it's immediately opposite. You go from uh, he's not a very good caddy. Golf is not yet the national game of Korea, eh? And then little things. He tries to throw Bond off in the golf game when Bond goes to do his swing, and he stops him. Strict rules of golf, as if to mess up Bond's swing, and then Bond just stares at him. Not truly. Little things like that, and it shows that almost like a childish nature, which is really interesting. But the key scene for me in Goldfinger is actually on the front porch of Orkstad, when Bond comes back with his calculations, and he's like, your plan is ridiculous, which of course was the screenwriters explaining why it took them months to figure out how to fix the problem in Fleming's novel, because in the novel, Goldfinger literally tries to rob Fort Knox, and he has all of the mob lieutenants and gang bosses help form an army to rob Fort Knox. And it's like, well, that's a striking idea, but practically it's impossible. So then Bond spouts off all these figures because he's been stuck in a prison cell for hours, and then he goes through all this stuff, and he sort of like finishes and smirks. He was like, at the most, you're gonna have 2 hours before the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines arrive and make you put it back. And then Goldfinger, just not even looking, just says, who said anything about removing it? You plan to break into the world's largest bank, but not to steal anything. And it's this back and forth. And again, like the Dr. No dinner scene, it's just riveting because we don't know what his plan is. We think he's just going to rob Fort Knox. We've been led to believe that. And again, this is added suspense for people who had read the book beforehand. And then the chilling aspect comes in when, Bond deduces, you know, his government's giving you a bomb. And then Goldfinger, I prefer to call it an atomic device. It's small, but particularly dirty. And then, you'll kill 60,000 people uselessly. American motorists kill that many every 2 years. And then it's just that nonchalance, which makes the scope of his plot and how he's so close to achieving this. He has everything planned out to the minute detail. It gives dramatic weight. And again, it's because it's like, oh, he's just like, oh, I'm just talking about the weather. Julep taught enough for you. It's those little flourishes. And again, it's amazing that whole performance is dubbed at the same time and has such dramatic weight. So I think that's what makes Goldfinger a fascinating character in the film. And of course, talked about Largo already. I love his physicality, how Bond challenges him as a man, not just as a villain, and Domino is sort of the focal point between them. And of course, Fiona Volpe picks up on this. It's like, you would like Bond dead. I can think of no better arrangement, because he tries to make love to your woman. And then of course Largo tries to say, because he is Bond and is an enemy of Spectre. It's like, okay, yeah, that, but we also can see like you've been challenged. It's like you just want to kill this guy because you want to kill this guy. And then of course the unseen Blofeld, and I mean, Fiona Volpe. That's an entire movie in and of itself. I mean, Luciano Paluzzi in that role is just like, you can't take your eyes off her. She's fascinating, and it's like, yeah, she would kill you, but it would be a fun experience, because she's so interesting, and the film loses energy once she's gone, and you're like, no, come back, like we'll just pretend like that scene was amazing. And but you could still like of course when they lifted it for Spy Who Shagged Me, like die powers, when they do the shot in the back, and they shoot her over, she won't die. It's like, yeah, we love Fiona so much, please don't die, please come back. Like, you're so fascinating. Because it's enjoyable to see her and Bond interact, and that back and forth, and the fact that the female isn't falling head over heels over Bond and isn't changing allegiances, which was also a way of addressing the criticism over Pussy Galore doing that in Goldfinger. One roll in the hay, and it's like, oh, I've left all my convictions behind, and they literally reference that in the dialogue. So then going to You Only Live Twice, you have the first on-screen Blofeld, which we get Donald Pleasance, who of course is the whole visage of that Blofeld is so iconic. It's burned in people's brains. Even if they've never seen the film, they know Blofeld is the bald guy with the outfit and the white cat, and the inspiration for Dr. Evil and so many other villains. But again, what I like, of course, Pleasance wasn't their original choice. They had a different actor at first, and then Pleasance was the last minute thing. But I really love the fact that he uses his physicality. He is a smaller. He's obviously much shorter than Connery is. He's a smaller person, but he uses that, and in similar ways that he in some of his other villainous roles. But I love the sort of, it's a very, he gives this very weird vibe. Blofeld does, Live Twice, but he has the cat, but the way he speaks is very like almost closed mouth, and is like, extortion is my business. Go and think it over, gentlemen. You only live twice, Mr. Bond. It's very cold, and that gives him more of an impact, I think. And of course, the reveal of his face finally, and the big scar. It's fantastic, but it's a different sort of villain, which I appreciate. Every time it's a bit different. That keeps it fresher, so you don't get the same villain every time. And of course, again, physically, he's probably not exactly a match for Bond. And so, what does he do when he gets thwarted? He just goes on the monorail to his little private escape route, and of course, he has the ever convenient use the key, and it's the blow the bass switch. You got to have one of those somewhere always. And that's contrasted in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. We get Blofeld #2, and Telly Savalas is much more. He is the physical villain. He goes on skis and leads the men, so you have that sort of Largo vibe as well, because he also is challenged directly by Bond and thwarted by Bond. Particularly the moment when Peace Glory explodes and he goes across the ice bridge, and when he turns around, that look, he has this look of like pain in his face. He's like, "Oh no, my fortress!" And you almost feel for him for a second. He's like, "I was so close. I was gonna get my title recognized. I was gonna get pardoned. I was gonna get to be a snob. It was gonna be great. It was my master plan, and now it's ruined." And then of course the idea of revenge goes right into the ending of the film. And I love that it also shows him in the neck brace, so he's been physically damaged as well. Again, and of course the film is much more grounded, so it really helps that you have that visceral quality to the Bond villain relationship, that personal, the digs between Bond and villain, the digs at each other are much more personal, like they are in Thunderball. That notion of Bond not just challenging the villain, but challenging him personally and destroying his organization, and like Dr. No said, hurting the pride of the villain. It's like you're not good enough to stop me, you know. And then going into Diamonds Are Forever, I'm trying to get through everything. You get the inverse of that. But it's cool seeing that Blofeld, because that Diamonds is a film with a different tonality. I think the best way to describe it is it's a Bond film with a streak of inherent satire. It's poking around the Bond formula that had been established in a way to freshen things up and to have a have a fun ride with an audience who knew Bond films. So you have Blofeld come back, but he's a little bit different. As Tom Mankiewicz put it, he's a little fussy. you know so you have the great reveal scene in Willard White's penthouse once Bond thinks that he's killed Blofeld, which is right out of You Only Live Twice, the novel, which is a nice using of a piece of Fleming that hadn't been used before, which was something the films would develop into an art form. Like, oh, what do we got left in the Fleming bag? Oh, we got that piece in chapter 4 of Moonraker that we haven't used. Can we fit that in somewhere? But I love Charles Gray's Blofeld. I love that he's quote unquote fussy, and I love the dialogue. It's so rewarding to realize it's like, but if I were to tell anyone, it would of course be to you first, Mr. Bond. But it's getting late, and I'm tired, and there's still so much left to do. My favorite Blofeld line actually is totally throwaway. I don't know why I quote it all the time, but my favorite Blofeld line is literally, it's very tiny. It's when they played the dummy cassette of World's Greatest Marches, and they're sitting there in the office, and they're just standing there listening to this little cassette that Bond has brought on to switch out for the real thing. And it's obvious that his ruse has been discovered. We see the hole in his suit lighting, and then they just sit there, and the Blofeld's like, he finally just switches it off. I do so hate martial music. It's just like, you could picture somebody really saying that. The fact that he sits there and listens to it for a minute is like, so sorry to ruin the lining of your suit for nothing. Yes, Mr. Bond, you guessed, as usual, correctly, that tape contained the master satellite control tape, and you brought this on board, hopefully trying to exchange this for the real thing. So sorry to ruin the lining of your suit for nothing. It's just like, they've played this game so many times before that their Blofeld's almost kind of tired of it, and Bond is a little bit. So there's like this idea of they're almost like going through the motions a little bit, which is fascinating, and again goes back to that sort of idea that I think Tom Mankiewicz really injects in there. Like, it's not a satire, it's not laughing at the Bond films, it's laughing with them in a way. It's like, yes, we know we're doing this again, let's have a little bit more fun with it. Let's see where we can sort of twist this and sort of play on this formula we have, to poke holes in the inherent silliness in places, which is why I think Diamonds is a great film, and I think that's the quality that really makes it special. And I feel that's what a lot of people miss. And so, like, a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, Charles Gray's Blofeld, yeah, he's Blofeld with hair. He's kind of weird. He's very funny, and it's not a traditional Bond villain, because he's kind of, a lot of people will say he's campy and stuff like that." And I'm like, well, you could make that argument, but the actual plot and the dangers Bond faces are real. That's what keeps Diamonds on track. It doesn't lose the focus of the Bond film narrative. It's still a Bond film, but it has like little bits of wackiness worked into it to really play around and toy with the established formula, and that's personified in Wint and Kidd. The way they just beautifully dispose of people, and this bizarre sort of outlook they have on life, and the fact that they're in some sort of relationship and they finish each other's sentences. It's fascinating. You want a whole movie of them. You want, and again, taking an idea in Fleming's novel that's there, but running with it and turning it on its head a little bit to inject this macabre humor. It's just, oh, it's so rewarding and so fascinating. Again, you want a whole movie of these guys, or right down to the fact that when Bond sets Kid on fire in the end, and he dives over the side, and then the look on Wint's face is like, "You just killed my best friend." And then he starts stringing him even harder. Like there's a slight pause. It's like, "Oh no, you will die." So yeah, it's even little things like that. So again, I could make the case for all of them. I'm trying to run through to get through everybody, but then going on to Live and Let Die, I think Kananga is a fascinating villain. And again, that idea of Bond challenging villain, not just as villain, but on a personal level, the malice Kananga has towards Bond, because not just Bond is tearing apart his organization, but actually, steals solitaire away from him, which is right out of the novel. But then, actually sleeps with solitaire, and then solitaire is robbed of her powers. And it's, established that, Kananga had romantic designs upon solitaire as well. So again, that idea of him being challenged not just in his plot, but emotionally and physically and directly. And I think Yaphet Kotto has such a level of malice, and you really feel his dialogue, and even simple little things. But for example, when Bond discovers the heroin, the poppy fields, first it's, if he finds it, kill him. But once he escapes and he gets out, and the helicopter can't find him, and he's got solitaire, it becomes, any cost, any Bond must die. It's just speaking into a telephone, but he says it with such malice. It's like this air of finality, like it really, and then Bond escapes again, so he's thwarted again. And then we get to this the confrontation scene underneath the aptly named Fillet of Soul, which still I think deserves a special medal for genius. That name, Fillet of Soul. But again, that physical confrontation, get the amazing moment when he tears off the Mr. Big makeup, which nowadays, when you look at the makeup closely, it obviously looks a little like makeup, but it's still an amazing moment when he literally pulls his nose off. Just like, especially when you see it as a kid, it just burns itself into your brain. But again, he's been emotionally challenged by Bond. And then I love the fact that he lets Bond go. He obviously to be killed, but he lets Solitaire think that she gave the right answer. And then he directly confronts her as if he was a jilted lover, as if, if you were suddenly watching a movie about a married couple where one person had committed adultery or something, and then, why Solitaire, why? And it's like, wow, this is a fascinating dimension. And then he turns on her, and he like almost like touches her face a little bit, like it's again like lovers reconciling almost. And then he turns around, and then he just backhands her, and it's like this moment of brutality. And then he just screams down her, when the time came, I myself will give you love, you knew that. There's only one way to deal with this, and one proper time. And you get the death card, and then the figure of death himself laughs, Jeffrey Holder. It's just, oh, again, and most of Kananga's lines, or he delivers them with, he's like trying to control himself. So you can sense this seething rage and all this stuff. And it comes out again when he cuts Bond's arm with the knife maliciously in the climax, and he just goes, and he's like, and you see his teeth and his tongue come out a little bit, perhaps trying something on an even simpler vein. And then when Bond escapes and they have that final fight, and he's got the knife like this, and he's, going around, and again, he shows his teeth, and, Bond has to like prepare himself. It's much more getting that direct emotional involvement, which I think is really rewarding. And then going into Man with the Golden Gun, you have that as well with the whole Bond Scaramanga dynamic that's been set up. But Christopher Lee really brings a soul to the character, really, that it's such a shame he has to die. He's so fascinating, and he's so likable, even though he's the world's greatest assassin and all he does is kill people. The loneliness he speaks about, is really touching in a way. And so, it's a shame Bond has to kill him. It's like, well, he's likable in his own way, and he lives on his island retreat, and he's gonna sell solar energy to the highest bidder, and he's very intelligent, he's very cultured, he's very forward thinking. His world perspective is very open. His best friend is Knick-Knack. He doesn't look down on people. He's a very interesting villain, and it's almost cold in a way how Bond just dispatches him. But Bond has been challenged and is under the gun for most of the movie because he thinks he's the target of Scaramanga. And the brilliant reveal that it's actually Andrea Anders who sent the bullet to MI6, and it's almost From Russia with Love in a way. The notion of there being a pivotal moment that's very grounded but makes the plot even more complicated and makes you realize that things are not what they seem. And it humanizes Scaramanga in a way. There's the absolutely breathtaking moment when he comes back on the junk, and after seeing Bond for the first time outside the Bottoms Up Club, and he pulls the golden gun out, and he starts confronting Andrea with it, and then starts running it up and down her body and her face and across her mouth. And of course, when you look at it, it's a obviously maybe phallic imagery and supposed to have a sexual content, but it's really it has that perverse element, but it's also that controlling element, because Andrea is the kept woman and is very threatened. She fears for her life at every moment. But it's also in a way like he's confronting her, and it's silent, but in Christopher Lee's close-ups, the way his facial reactions are, it's like he senses something's wrong, something's not quite right. She's hiding something, and that look in his face when his eyes sort of open up, and of course he's probing her with the barrel of the golden gun, and with John Barry's beautifully lush score, it's really emotional in that strange sort of way. And it's a very strange relationship we're looking at, but it's very striking. And that's a particular note you don't really get in the other films, or you don't expect. So I find Scaramanga just the film version a really supremely interesting characterization, which is totally different than what we get in the novel. And I think Christopher Lee's delivery of Scaramanga's backstory at the kickboxing fight is just majestic, when he gives the whole when I was a boy in the circus, my only real friend was a magnificent African bull elephant. One day his handler mistreated him and he went berserk. He came and found me, picked me up, put me on his back, stood on one leg, his best trick, and then and then goes into the police sergeant emptied his pistol into his eye. I emptied my stage pistol into his. You see, Mr. Bond, I always thought I liked animals, but then I discovered I liked killing people even more. It's just this. He goes from reminiscing, he goes to coldness, he goes to joy when he recounts the first time he killed someone, and then right back into that air of civility, which is just fascinating. And the whole time, Bond just takes it all in. When, of course, he's confronted behind him by a gun and a bag of peanuts. And Knick-Knack just sits there eating the peanuts, like, I love hearing this story. So it still has that nice touch of the bizarre and the nice touch of humor. But yeah, I'm trying to run through all of them. I know I'm just kind of rambling, but again, I could talk about all of them. Do you want me to like keep going, trying to like just fast track through all of them, or maybe we should sort of condense it down in the interest of time?
Oh
Because I
no,
want to
this
make
is
sure.
great. This is great. I let me ask you though, you're on
Mhm.
Scaramanga. I must ask you about this particular moment. I agree with you about the kickboxing scene. And why does Scaramanga reveal himself to Bond at this moment? Because part of his shtick is that no one knows who he looks like, right? Except for this close circle. So and he doesn't seem to invite Bond further. He obviously doesn't want him to interfere in his plans regarding the Solex agitator. and his trying to take over of high fats operations. So why do you think he reveals himself at the
I
moment he
think it's
does?
I think it's kind of a twofold thing. I think it's for two reasons. Because when I was growing up watching the film, I actually wondered that at a certain point. I wondered, it's like no one knows where he is, no one knows what he looks like. Why does he show himself? So I think it's really two reasons. One, he of course had to eliminate Andrea. Mistress cannot serve two masters. So he's already there. But I think on one point it's to warn Bond, stay away. You know, you're I know you're on my trail, but if you continue on this line of work, I will have to eliminate you. So that's why he says, please don't try to follow me on all this stuff. But also, it's a chance to meet his hero. It's a chance to meet his the person he idolizes in a way, because he keeps a literal likeness of him. So it's a chance. We will never have this chance again. And personally, I thought we never should meet, but he couldn't resist being able to meet the only person he considers someone who is on equal footing, who would understand the life of a professional assassin, who was as skilled as Scaramanga himself was. So it was, you know, meeting a I hate to give it a work connotation, but it's like meeting your opposite number. That one chance you get to meet. So it's sort of it's both to warn Bond off, and also he has to look for the Solex as well. So he's already there, and he even says, "I already looked in her handbag. You won't find it there." Of course, he didn't think to look down on the ground where there's the all important Solex just laying there on the dirty floor. um, but yes, I mean, he already had to go there to that seating area. And it's amazing how he shot Andrea from like apparently across the packed stadium. A difficult shot, but most gratifying. It's just it's beautifully done, beautifully played. But I think it's sort of a mix of those two. He's warning Bond to stay away, but it's also he can't resist finally getting to meet 007. And then it's like, well, I did it later, 20 years later, you could say, well, remember that time I finally met 007? He really was fantastic, wasn't he? So it's like you almost expect him. He doesn't whip out an autograph book, but you could maybe expect that. You'd be like, I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind terribly. Would you sign my book? Yeah. Not quite full hero worship, but there is a little tinge of that, which makes Scaramanga more human. So I really find that fascinating. So that would be my answer, sort of like a twofold thing.
Hmm. I like in particular how you described it as being a humanizing moment. I think if we were to remember too, as you rightly point out, about how this is where he's revealing his entire backstory, and it's in fact perhaps the place where we see him in the most sympathetic light as a character, then it stands to reason that also in this moment where he is the most humanized, he displays yet another aspect of that humanized character, which is quote unquote meeting your heroes. I know you didn't claim it that far, but I understand the train of thought there,
Yes.
and I agree. I
Mhm.
agree 100%. That's a really good point. I never really thought of it that way, but now that I think about it, that's great. That is really interesting. And he is human after all. He's not this this icy steel killer like a Red Grant is. Although even Red Grant has his moments of quote unquote humanity and weakness. So, but that's great. That is great. So let's continue on then with now we go to Spy, the Spy Who
Yeah,
Loved Me.
and I'm trying to get little like bite-sized pieces for each, because I want to make sure we get to all your questions, because of the last ones we did, I was like, man, that was fantastic. Oh man, we didn't finish all his questions. I want to make sure to get through them this time, because again, I have a tendency when I get the chance to really talk about something, I can really get into details, but Star Wars is one thing, but then Bond is most of all. Like if I can ever have a Bond discussion, I find it really difficult to not Like somebody says one thing and it's like, you know 2 seconds later I've talked for 45 minutes straight, and I just can't help it, because you don't get the chance to expound upon this in everyday life. I mean, I do anyway, and people have no clue what I'm talking about. I can't. I quote the films almost on a daily basis just without realizing it. It just comes out. Um, like I've said, I do so hate martial music more times than I can count. But so yeah, getting back into it again. I'm just like coming up with like little bite-sized pieces. So with Stromberg, he is the rich, evil megalomaniac, and of course, originally the idea that it was going to be Spectre in the film, but Kevin McClory popped up and was like, "No, I'm going to do my Warhead 75. You can't use this. Your plot is very similar to mine, so you have to change it." So they just completely got rid of Spectre and just changed it to rich, evil billionaire. Which actually was very smart on their part, and sort of definitely fit with the times, because there were people like that, characters who existed in terms of there were, you know, very rich, wealthy people who could ostensibly mount some sort of plot like this if they wanted to. Um, but the way that Kurt Jurgens plays Stromberg, and the way that Stromberg's characterization is, he's, not quite a villain by proxy, but he likes to, do things while still at his home base and his like lovely, it's not lounge clothes, but he's always on the wonderful body molded chairs, and he has the ornate dining room, and he has all his switches and his consoles. So he likes to do a murder from a distance. He likes to watch, which I find really interesting. And so he's not the physical villain. He's not the emotionally charged villain, but of course he has Jaws for that, and he has Sandor for that. So he has he has his henchman army, he has his own private army, so he doesn't need to be the physical villain. So uh, in terms of impact, he's much more subdued. So that's a certain quality that leads a lot of people to immediately say, "Oh, well, I don't like him as much because he's just always pushing buttons, and he's just sitting in Atlantis and watching stuff happen and eating fine food." But it's again, it's different. We hadn't quite seen that before, so it was bringing a new element to the traditional Bond villain. And of course it's revealed that he is insane, so there's no way of reaching him, and he has the means to exact his plan. So it's I don't know, it's hard to describe, but again, it's a different sort of feeling than what we've gotten before in terms of a Bond villain. So I find it really interesting to study. Of course, I wish the film, you get the little bit of his webbed fingers, but that's about it. But Christopher Wood wrote an amazing backstory. It's in the novelization, which is really fascinating because while the film is one way, the novelization does the film's plot, but Christopher Wood wrote it as a Fleming pastiche. So it reads literally like if Ian Fleming wrote a novel version of the Spy Who Loved Me film story. So there's you get Stromberg's backstory, how he builds his fortune is really fascinating. It feels similar to Red Grant's backstory in From Russia with Love, the novel. And so once I read that, I can't help but picture that as the backstory to the film characters. You get Jaws's backstory, like why he gets the metal teeth, and in the process of the surgery to install them, they cut his vocal cords, which is why he doesn't speak in the film. And he's like devoted to Stromberg completely. It's so much little bits of character in that novelization, and it's a lot darker. It is like full. There's a torture sequence in there, like a full Fleming torture sequence, not in the film at all. It's after the pyramids, when Bond fights the two Russian agents and Anya just stands there. Well, in the novelization, he gets jumped by them and knocked unconscious, and then they bring him back to a hotel room where Anya leads a torture to find out what he knows. So and they in sort of a nod to Casino Royale, it involves the same sort of anatomical area, and they hook him to essentially a car battery, and they're giving him electroshock. So it's a full-on flaming torture sequence in the middle, which is really interesting. But there's a lot of little interesting character bits for Stromberg that are there that I can't help but read into the film. And one of them is the webbed fingers. So, which apparently was like one of the things that as a child made him first so fascinated with water and aquatic life. So you get more explanation of why is he so fascinated with water, whereas in the film, it's like he likes water. Like he likes water a lot. He likes marine life. That's all we get. um so yeah, he's an interesting, fascinating character, but I can't help but when I look at the film now, I always read in some of the stuff from the novelization, because again, it's a really interesting backstory, and it's really cool to see how he builds his fortune and then goes into shipping and stuff. um and then, of course, you have Jaws, who is unbelievably iconic. And Richard Kiel literally just has to, you see his face and you immediately are just like, oh, wow, yes. And of course, physically, when he confronts Roger, when he picks him up on the train and his hand is as big as Roger's head, it's just like, um, this could go very badly for Bond right now. Like, how is he going to physically fight this guy? It's like it's like Bond fighting Oddjob in Fort Knox. As Guy Hamilton told Connery, it's like, you're going to have to fight a guy who can crush golf balls with his bare hands. So how are you going to defeat this guy? You can't physically defeat him. So you see Bond have to use his ingenuity and play on the fact that, Jaws is, he's menacing in Spy, but he's not quite the cartoonish character he gets to be in Moonraker. But he's obviously several steps behind Bond in terms of he can't think quite as fast. So that's Bond's one advantage, and he uses that because physically he's no match. And of course, they have him punch Jaws's teeth like 10 times in Spy and Moonraker. And you would think after the first time, don't punch him in the steel teeth. You're going to hurt your hand. It's not going to work. And every time you get that, pang, ow. Like, you've done that already. You should know by now.
Although I'm sorry to cut you, let me just say one thing about Jaws. You're absolutely right. Bond tends to be one step ahead of him, except one moment where Jaws tricks him in the hallways in Atlantis at the very
And the
end.
pyramids,
Yeah,
too.
that's right.
Yeah.
Very good. Yes, yes. And in terms of being able to escape, and so
Yeah. So
he's
he's
quite
not, he's still, he's menacing.
exactly, yes,
And
and he's also
that's,
clever and he's intelligent too. Yes,
yes.
yes,
And he keeps trying, which makes him endearing, which is why
yeah.
everybody loves him. And the moment when they added the rock dropping, which was the one element of a little bit of comedy, but it's just like he tries so hard. He really tries. It's like Winton Kid. At first you don't succeed, try again. It's like they're so fascinating. You want them to succeed. It's the same way we all love Nick Nack, because he really loves his job and he's actually quite good at it, even though he doesn't let his physical limitations get in his way. And like all the little things, like there's step ladders everywhere, and then to get to the control booth for the fun house, he has the motorized chairlift and he climbs on everything. He has the viewports and everything. And he also loves his boss. So and Jaws loves his boss too. So there's that interesting dynamic. And then getting into Moonraker, which is very much based on the plot structure of Spy. Drax, you could make the argument, is sort of a reworking of Stromberg and characterization and plot and everything. And just as you could say, Moonraker is like Spy, but in space. They go from underwater to space. But I actually, I think it's no secret, I love Drax. I know you love Drax. But he's has some of the elements of the Diamonds Are Forever Blofeld, all these little witticisms and these dry, snarky comments, which are just delicious, But I love what Michel Lonsdale does with the role, and he has wonderful amounts of menace in the right areas. And the jousting he and Roger Moore do is really, really richly layered. And I love Drax. I think, as much as I can stick up for Stromberg, I think Drax is a richer character in Moonraker. I think because we have a bit more to go on, and there's also he does get angry at certain points. When he yells at Drax to expel, when he yells at Jaws to expel Bond and Holly on the space station, he's literally angry. We also get more of a reason why he's doing this plot. It's not just because he's rich. It's because he wants to repopulate the Earth and literally rule it himself, which ostensibly was what Stromberg was going to do with his underwater city, but it's not spelled out. Whereas in Moonraker, it literally is spelled out. And that's like, oh, he's not just crazy. He literally has a actual god complex. And it's literally, the floating stud farm. It's literally a version of Noah's Ark, but with people. And I also love the ecological concern that, he expressly, makes sure not to harm any plant or animal life. One must preserve the balance of nature. Again, the novelization is like the one Chris Wood did for Spy Who Loved Me. He did the one for Moonraker. It's the same thing. It's written in the style of Fleming, and you get a little bit of backstory for Drax, and there are some allusions to the novel version of Drax, because the novel version is obviously different in terms of his backstory, but there's some extra stuff to read into, and he goes into a little extra detail about Drax's plot. It's not just that he has a god complex. Apparently, I don't know, I guess maybe because he wrote the screenplay as well, but apparently Drax's motivation for even developing this idea is he was actually concerned about overpopulation. And he was like, well, I want to save the world, and I'm going to do it this way, and I'll get to rule it too. And I thought that was really fascinating. I wish that had been in the film somewhere, but there's those two Christopher Wood novelizations. They've been out of print for years, but they're so rewarding if you track them down, because they're literally like, people always complain about the Roger Moore era. They're like, oh, there's all these gadgets, and then Moonraker, they have laser guns in space and stuff. I'm like, well, there's actually versions of those that are pure Fleming style. If you read these 1970s novelizations, they're, like really, really interesting. Like, we how we see Corinne's death in the film, which is really one of the most horrendous deaths in the series, is so striking and haunting. Well, in the novel, it's the novelization, I should say, it's at first it's the original character of Trudy, who was the Californian girl before they changed it to a French character because they shot it in France, so they needed to use French personnel and actors. But it's done in the way Goldfinger, the novel, is done, where we don't see Joe Masterson's death. It's alluded to, and then Bond hears about it later. They do the same. He does the same thing. So it's a direct Fleming style piece, where in the novelization we don't see her death. And if I'm remembering correctly, Bond doesn't even know about it. He just realizes that she's dead and hears that she's dead, that died later in a accident, which is what Drax meant for Bond, which is why he sets up the whole thing with the hunting and has Bond come out and hands him a gun. A stray bird might fly over, and that scene is a key moment for Drax. It's one of Roger's best moments. It's one of those moments I go to when people say, oh, Roger Moore is too light, he's too funny. He plays Bond like he plays Simon Templar, which is totally off base and unfair, I think. That's one of the key scenes I point to and I bring up, and I go back to Moonraker. If you look at the first half of it, the first half of Moonraker is pretty straightforward, very grounded, rather serious. There's a lot of actual spying going on. But if you look at that scene, it's the Bond villain confrontation, but Bond knows Drax is the villain. Drax knows that Bond knows that he's the villain, but they can't admit it openly because Drax still has a public persona and cover, and he knows that Bond doesn't have the required evidence to prove all this stuff. But still, he's going to try and kill him anyway. And he's rigged up this whole thing to have Bond shot by accident in a hunting accident. And it's Bond's ingenuity that allows him to spot the guy in the tree at the last second and get the drop on him, and also make it look like he just missed. And then we get the great reveal of the body falling out of the tree. Did I? And then Drax he doesn't even say anything. He just literally has that look with a slight, almost, he's not quite crestfallen, but he's just like, and it sets up later, you defy all my attempts to plan an amusing death for you, Mr. Bond. It's just, again, a level of menace, a level of deliciousness in the dialogue. and he has this bemusement. Drax does this very detached bemusement the whole film. Bond keeps thwarting him, but it's like, um, you appear with the tedious inevitability of an unloved season. Again, even the put downs are, like, and of course the ultimate put down maybe is, you arrive at the propitious moment, uh your country's one indisputable contribution to Western civilization, afternoon tea. And it's like, wow, that's insulting. you know so but it's always with that veneer of sophistication, and it's almost like he's bored in ways, which makes me think of Fleming's Mr. Big and Live and Let Die. How he says, I suffer from what the ancient Christians call acidity, which is boredom. So I'm letting you live because I'm so bored that I think it'd be more interesting to hurt you a bit and send you on your way and don't come after me. But if you do come after me, I will kill you. So there's like maybe a little air of that, which I find really fascinating. So I think Drax is one of the most interesting villains to study. You could just, again, he's a film in and of himself, and the performance is just fantastic. So then going from there into For Your Eyes Only, where they were, let's pull everything back down to ground. We get the usage of the two figure scenario from the Fleming short story Risico, with Christados and with Colombo. And of course, the idea is one is setting up, the other is the villain. And then Bond gets the reveal of Colombo is actually the good character and Christados is the villain, which is right out of the Fleming short story. And they changed the characterization somewhat, but it's still pretty much the same idea. And I love the performances of both actors. I think Julian Glover is fantastic as Christados. I think there's a lot of really interesting elements there, and it's a dual performance because you have the two halves. You have the, oh, I'm actually the good guy. What you really want is you must find Columbo. They call him the Dove. It's a sick joke. And then once the reveal happens, it's the same guy, same voice, same everything, but the whole air is changed. All that sophistication, all the airs he was putting on, the day she wins the gold medal will be the greatest of my life. He gets like a little teary eyed. That's all gone. That was just an act, and we realized that. And then the Bond is like, oh, I see your true colors now. So it's a really nice dual performance, and there's a bit of that with Columbo too, because we see him at first at a distance and we don't know what he's like. So there's a little bit of mystery there. And we, of course, at that point think he is the main villain of the film until he's confronting Bond on his own boat and literally pulls Bond's own gun on him at one point. And we get a sudden reveal, and it's like, oh, this guy's actually larger than life. It's been a setup, and this guy is literally like the reincarnation of Karim Bey. I love this man. I love him. I thought he was going to be the villain, and it's like, I smuggle gold, pistachio nuts. It's about these. Chris Datos is the one you want, and then it's like, oh, and then we get into the whole fact that the film is really getting back to the traditional From Russia with Love spy story. It's two-fisted, it's grounded. But once Topol as Christados reveals himself, he's got the unbuttoned shirt and he's so full of life. And then the film basically becomes an adventure film, because they go to the Albanian warehouse as by a sailboat at night, and it becomes a nice, great little battle. And it reveals to Bond, he shows Columbo shows Bond that it is Christados. He knows Bond won't quite believe him, so he does give him the evidence, but he also is like, come on, we're gonna raid his warehouse. You'll love it. Here's your gun back. It's like, so it's that element of, okay, now this actually has that element of adventure. Not quite, like the notion of being boys own adventure, but there's a little bit of that. It's really enjoyable to see guys jump off a sailboat and just they're throwing knives and fighting and machine guns and grenades, and then the whole place explodes. So there's that. And then Locke is very much like Red Grant. He doesn't really have any dialogue, but we see him repeatedly, and he builds his menace, and he kills off various people, and he kills Ferrara. And so there's dramatic weight when Bond finally dispatches him. and that's a fantastic scene. But again, Locke really shows his again, very, because it's very much in the Red Grant style. It once again goes to the idea that the film is trying to get back to that From Russia with Love seriousness, and get back to that the the Fleming swoop that he had in his novels. And of course, they're basing the entire film out of Fleming short story elements, because that they really wanted to get that. So that's what they did. So they went to what they hadn't adapted yet. So it's a fascinating dynamic between the two characters of Christados and Columbo, and they're always linked because Columbo is set up as the villain first. And you get a little bit of that in Octopussy with Kamal Khan and General Orlov. And of course, Octopussy herself is supposedly a villain at first. So there's a nice bit of duplicity again. And the lead villains are tonally very different. And in a lot of ways, I kind of wish Orlov was the lead villain, because Steven Berkoff is so fascinating in the role, and it's so full of life and everything, that the film kind of loses some energy when he gets dispatched. And you're like, no, don't go away yet. You're really entertaining. And I like the idea that it's sort of inspired, or he was at least inspired by Dr. Strangelove and George C. Scott's General Turgidson, which adds a nice sort of twisted element to that character, which I find fascinating. And it's cool seeing Louis Jourdan as Kamal Khan, sort of again the idea of the villain that's more in the Bond mold. You know, he's very Bond like, and he enjoys his villainy, but he does it with style and class and everything, which contrasts with Orlov. And Gobinda is another of the great henchmen who's totally devoted to his boss. You know, very much Oddjob like, right down to the fact that he crushes the loaded dice and the way that Oddjob crushes the golf balls. Doesn't really have a lot of dialogue, but has tremendous presence, which all villains and henchmen require. So you know, that presence means, you know, you're waiting for the end. Okay, you're waiting for the moment when Bond gets to dispatch him, because it's like, yes, you really got to get this guy, because he's just like his eyes have been burning holes through the screen the whole movie. And then getting to A View to a Kill, you have the just stunning character of Zorin, who is the first psychotic villain Bond has faced, and is not a challenge Bond has never come up against before. And like Stromberg, he's completely unreachable, but you know, he has that air, that veneer of sophistication. He has that veneer of civility, but you know, he literally even murders his own workers in cold blood. You know, they've fulfilled their part of the deal, and the rest of the plan is to you know, kill all of them, and then, you know, good, right on schedule. And Christopher Walken finds some really amazing little quirks and little ways to humanize Zorin and give him these extra layers that make him, he's a very odd character, and you can definitely tell this guy is really messed up. But it's almost in because they talk about his backstory. He was a product of genetic manipulation, and that's why he's psychotic. But it's almost like his brain doesn't work in the same way as everybody else. The way he processes stuff, and the scene in Hal's office when he just improvises his plan on the spot and shoots Hal in cold blood. You know, intuitive improvisation is a secret of genius. It's like you can see the wheels turning in his head, but his brain is not wired in the same way as a normal person, and he's psychotic, and he has power complexes, and you know, he's even, you know, thrown off the KGB. And you know, if you do that, you know, they come to your door and they're like, you comply or we kill you. And he's like, you know, he even threatens Gogol. He could kill Gogol right there, the head of the KGB. And it's almost like, you know, he probably would have done it. He just, you know, at the moment was like, Operation Main strikes in 3 days. If I do this will cause a delay. You know, I have to hold myself responsible. You know, like that's the only reason why he lets him go. You know, I mean, he ostensibly kills Bond, which is why Gogol shows up. You know, it's like, you did not ask permission to kill 007. It's like, I don't need permission. I no longer consider myself a KGB agent. You know, he's his own person, and nothing will stand in his way. And apparently, the only people he cares about are Dr. Mortner and Scarpine, and even Mayday is, you know, left in the dust. and left to perish along with everybody else, which makes her realize that her romantic liaison with Zorin was really just that. There was no relationship, and I thought that creep loved me. And it's interesting to see the villain and hinge person actually have a very sort of dark relationship, but then that's just thrown out with the garbage, and that causes her to seek revenge and sacrifice herself just to thwart his plans. She's literally giving him the middle finger, which is really really dramatic and wonderfully done. And his reaction, when he just simply says her name, and then the bomb goes off and his plan's been thwarted, and then and he has his hands and he literally pauses, and he can't even process this, his grandmaster scheme, and she's the one who did it. So it's there's such a complexity in A View to a Kill that I think makes the movie really rewarding. And it's a shame it gets saddled with not having such a good reputation, because it really is a very great film. It's got a lot of rewarding elements, and I like how it's Roger's last film, and yes, he is older, but I like how the film uses that. And there's a sort of throughout the film, there's this quality of Bond's older. You don't have the things in Never Say Never Again where it's Bond older and he's struggling to physically keep up. They don't do that. It's a thematic quality, and I think John Barry picks up on it in his score. There's almost a desperation, and there's a darker tonality that is what we see come to full fruition in the Dalton films. But it's already creeping in. It's there in A View to a Kill. It's a darker film, I think, than the two films that preceded it, really. I think it's a darker film. It definitely is darker in tone. You have the villain just, oozing down his entire work squad and killing everybody for no reason other than it suits him at the time. The villain is unhinged. So it's a darker film than the films that immediately preceded it. And I think it's one of those that repeat viewings. There's a lot of rewarding stuff there. And a lot of stuff beneath the surface, particularly with Zorin and Bond's relationship with him. And I like how Bond is older and he's having to deal with a complete psychopath but he uses his experience and the sort of wisdom gained to overcome Zorin, and that's a key factor in how he's able to defeat him. So I think that's a real aspect of the film that works beautifully. And people always say, oh, it would have been great to see Dalton's Bond go against Zorin, and I think that's true in a way, but I don't think it would have had the same depth to it, exactly because the way Rogers Bond reacts, after the horse scene, when the horse chase scene, and Bond realizes that Tippett is dead, and they pull him out of the rolls, and they've got a gun on him, and they disarm Bond, and then Zorin comes up and says, "You lost," but he says, "You lost 007," and you see Bond straighten up, and then the cinches my guys has dropped. He held it to the last minute. Now his cover's been exposed, and he's been thwarted. He's been disarmed, and Tippett has been killed. And then he literally gets angry. Killing Tippett was a mistake. I'm about to make the same mistake twice, and my department know I'm here. If they do, I hope they'll probably try to cover up your embarrassing incompetence. It's like, don't count on it, Zorin. You amuse me, Mr. Bond. It's not mutual. There's a nice layering there that comes out at that moment when Bond has been unmasked, and Zorin is just literally toying with him. He could just he probably just go again. He should just go ahead and kill him, but he's going to toy with him, and it's a lark. So that's a really interesting quirk, I think. So then, interest of time, let's trying to move along through everybody. Living Daylights, you get back to the multi-villain scenario, and I think the Koskov and Whitaker, again, a lot of people say, oh, well, they're not grand enough. It's not like a traditional Bond villain. But I think part of what makes the Living Daylights work is it's the best balancing I think the series has ever done in the later films between the Bond world and the real world. You could literally picture the entire story as actually taking place. It has the grandeur and the globe trotting of a Bond film. It has the traditional elements. You have the gadget laden Aston Martin as well, but it's still very grounded. And again, you can picture it as really happening. And of course, it's a mystery as a plot to unfold. And Koskov and Whitaker are completely different characters who are aligned simply to become immensely rich. And they've cooked up this plot together. And I think it's spelled out maybe a bit better, a bit clearer than the plot in Octopussy, which is very convoluted. And a lot of people question, exactly the intricacies of that plot. Why are they smuggling jewelry? How do they benefit on each side? The Living Daylights, I think, does a better job at making everything more explicit. And when it all boils down, it's a very simple plot, but getting to that is a mystery to unfurl, and Bond has to rely on his own instincts and go against his direct orders frequently and really show his character. And in doing so, again, unmasks a supposed ally who is actually a villain, and you get another great dual performance. And then I think Whitaker is a fascinating character. I love his scene with Pushkin, where he's going through, you see his ego on display, you see all the fascinating bit where he has all the statues of the great commanders, except they're all in his likeness. I mean, that is just fascinating. And it's just a brief little thing, but you don't expect something like that. And then he's got all the toy soldiers, and he reenacts battles, and he's got all this weaponry, and he goes on and on and on. And then Pushkin just punctures him, punctures his ego. You were expelled from West Point for cheating. Lies spread by my competitors. It's just like they're so human, which I find really interesting and refreshing. Much like Zorin, they're human, and it's different. And but again, it's believable, which I find very interesting. And we go into that even further in License to Kill with Sanchez, being almost ripped from the headlines as the great drug cartel leader. And of course, it being a film, a story about revenge and going off the grid, as it were. There's great grounding, and the Bond villain relationship, because Bond gets close to him and sort of using the Red Harvest or Yojimbo or Fistful of Dollars scenario of playing the villain against his own organization in order to destroy him. That's perhaps the most obvious moment of Bond personally attacking the villain. And the villain is completely human. He is larger than life in the requisite ways. He has great charisma, but he's still, he's not he's not Blofeld. He's not the traditional larger than life Bond villain in that sense. So it's one of the most realistic films we've gotten. And again, that it's sort of ripped from the headlines, but there's that great direct confrontation. Of course, it ends literally in the most brutal way with the end of the tanker truck scene, and then the truck flips over and they both get doused in gasoline, and they're both barely conscious, and they're both bleeding, and their clothes are destroyed, they're soaked in gasoline. And then Sanchez gets the drop on Bond, and he puts the machete against his face. He's going to brutally hack him apart to death. And then Bond is only able to stop him with the simple, "Don't you want to know why?" And of course, Sanchez, of course, would pause, because he does want to know why, because anybody would at that point. It's just as in Once Upon a Time in the West, when when Frank comes up and Harmonica's sitting there whittling the piece of wood, and they have that great dialogue, and he's like, "And now I know that it's over. You'll tell me what you're after. Only at the point of dying." It's like, I know, it's that element of finality. So it's that same sort of theme, and the whole film is built to that. And of course, Sanchez never really finds out why. Of course, maybe, I don't know if he could see the inscription on the lighter, because I always wondered, because they cut back to the moment when Bond gets presented with the lighter, so you could see the from Della and Felix, but it's like, Sanchez has never seen that lighter before. Is he gonna make that connection? And of course, at that point, it's like, I think Bond would like Sanchez to know, so he gets that, like, oh yeah, I did it because of this, It's like, watch the lighter, you bastard. But I don't know exactly. Bond really cares at that point. He's just like, yeah, I'm gonna kill you anyway. um that's just always a quirk I always thought about. It's like, can Sanchez see the inscription? Because there's a glare on it, does he know what that lighter means? Probably not, but it's still perfect, a perfect way to get rid of him anyway. It's very fitting. So that of course is fascinating, and his organization is fascinating. All the various characters that have their special talents that have been actually discarded from different places. Colonel Heller was like thrown out of the military, and he's being offered a deal for immunity, and Truman Lodge was like indicted for insider trading, so he got away, and now he's in Sanchez's empire. Dario is working with the Contras and is completely off the charts in terms of being completely psychotic and stuff. So yeah, it's interesting seeing all the disparate characters of his organization. um then getting into Goldeneye, you have again the setting up of one potential villain in Oromov, and then the reveal of the actual villain being Trevelyan. And then I think Oromov, after the reveal, is really fascinating to see his reactions to stuff. And I think it's kind of a shame he gets killed off in the train, because I almost picture what it would be like. Okay, now Oromov has been screwed over, and he's jeopardized his whole career and killed his fellow Russians and everything, and now he realizes he's been duped. So I'm like, it would be kind of cool if he and Bond had teamed up for a while. I always wonder, like, in a what if scenario. But yeah, I love what they do with the characterizations there. And of course you have Xenia Onatop, who is just iconic and fascinating, and a film in and of herself. Shame she gets killed off, because it's like you would like see her come back, just like Fiona. So yeah, again, it's so much to get into. I'm trying to make sure we have time to get to your other questions. I don't want to force us into having to do another part, although I love doing these conversations. These are fantastic. But I think with Trevelyan, my favorite thing and the most rewarding thing is the back history with Bond, and how he has his own particular reading of Bond's character. He knows how Bond thinks and how Bond acts. So how will Bond, stop him? And Bond has to manipulate Trevelyan and go back on their back history. And because he's grieved for 006 all these years. M has the line, killing Ormov won't bring, Alec Trevelyan back. You didn't get him killed. Neither did you. Don't make it personal. Never. It's like he's carried that guilt all these years. So when Trevelyan appears in the park of abandoned statues, it's like Bond has been completely betrayed. And he's held this for years, and now he realized he's been duped. And so when he asks why, it's with real question, and Trevelyan has all this anger. Why did you ever ask why? All those governments we toppled, all those dictators we toppled, did you ever even think to ask why? No, you're James Bond, Her Majesty's loyal terrier, defender of the so-called faith. And that whole sequence is the whole point of Trevelyan's character. All that dialogue, uh, you know, um, only to come home and hear, sorry, old boy, everything you risked your life and limb for has changed. It's the whole rationale why he became Yanis, why he developed this whole scheme. And then, he even says, I even thought of asking you to join my little scheme, but somehow I knew 007's loyalty was always to the mission, never to his friend. And then he references their banter from the pre-titles, closing time, James, last call. And Bond knows, oh crap. And then, but he can't get the shot off in time because he's also hesitating, because this is still, the person he's grieved for all these years. This was his friend. So in the climax, Bond has to overcome his own personal hangups and figure out how he can defeat 006, or X 006. And, even down to the fact that he can't use his gadgets because Trevelyan knows exactly how to disarm the bomb timers on the Omega wristwatch. Q still up to his old tricks. Still press here, do I? Which is a chilling moment, because then it's like, oh, well, Bond's screwed now. Like that plan's not going to work. So it's again that emotional depth that I think is really rewarding with that particular character. And then there's lots of that in Tomorrow Never Dies with Carver, who is perhaps on repeat viewings becomes the most revealing of the villains of the Brosnan films, because at first it's like, oh, we're back to the traditional megalomaniac with the ability to carry out his dastardly scheme, but he's very human. We have the character of Paris, who he actually has his own wife killed, and because he has been betrayed, and he gets emotional about it. He realizes that she knows Bond, so that adds another weight to the relationship between Bond and Carver. And then he has the wonderful monologues he gets into, and his plot is still prescient to this day. It's perhaps even more prescient. The idea of a media baron not only controlling news, but creating it for his own personal gain, and it's very much believable, in a very chilling way. And I think it's even more impactful now that we've seen various elements happen that make it seem more plausible. So it's gained in prescience in the years since, and I think Jonathan Pryce does some amazing work, and particularly I love the stillness he gets, which really makes his dialogue chilling. He has so many great lines that, again, on repeat viewings, really start to jump out at you. Let's see, insanity and genius measured, the distance between insanity and genius are measured only by success. It's like, yeah, that you could almost see that in a book of philosophy. It's like, that's quite good, actually. Sorry, my throat's a little dry. Still hitting the morning coffee because, of course, it's pretty early on my end. But anyway, so I think Carver is a really fascinating villain, and while it is partially the traditional Bond villain type archetype people think of, they play with it with interesting ways. And I like that Carver has a human side as well as the evil mastermind side. And also, he's not able to physically fight Bond either, so he has Stamper to do his fighting for him. So there's maybe a dash of Stromberg there, and Drax not being the physical, being able to physically defeat Bond with their bare hands. So yeah, I think it's a very rewarding characterization. And then you get to the world's not enough. You go back to the multiple villains. You go to another villain who is set up as, this time, as the the Bond girl, as it were, and then the great reveal of her being the, not just the villain, but the primary villain. And again, Bond having to overcome his hangups, as in Goldeneye, and how to dispatch her, and that adds all the dramatic weight to how he is able to finally do so. Um, and then that makes Renard an even more complex character, because he's set up as the main villain, but then it's revealed he's actually manipulated and practically controlled by his relationship with Elektra, that developed over the process of when he kidnapped her as a younger person, and how over the course of the film it revealed that she essentially broke mentally and became a completely different person, because her ordeal, it Bond at first thinks it was perhaps Stockholm syndrome, but in fact it was the reverse, which is a brilliant conceit and very, deep psychological character motivations. And so that's why the most rewarding things in the whole film for me are the character scenes. And Michael Apted was known as a director for really getting to the heart of character and really intense dramas, and of course the Up series of documentaries. So I think he was a perfect choice for that sort of material. And Pierce Brosnan wanted more character stuff, so I know they sort of tried to tailor the script with an idea of, let's get more into performance, let's give, Pierce really wants to deepen his acting range and really get into some deeper character material. So I know that was the impetus behind that. It's the most fascinating thing in the film, and in most ways, I wish there was actually more detail. Like I find Renard and Electra so fascinating that I want to know more. I want to, see them do more stuff, and see more of their relationship, because it's held back to the second half of the film, because you have the reveal of Electra. Um, again, go into the novelization. Raymond Benson wrote the novelization. He gives Renard a backstory, which is really fascinating and I really enjoy. And again, when I see the film now, I think of that. I have that in the back of my head, which adds to the characterization. Um, and there's a little bit more of their relationship in there. So again, once you read these novelizations, you can't help but read some of that back into the film. But I think that's the richest part of The World's Not Enough as a film is the Electra Renard dynamic and how Bond fits into that. There's the great moment when they're in the bedroom and they've ostensibly killed Bond and Electra's very quiet and Renard says why are you like this you know uh you wanted Bond dead is what you wanted and then he gets really quiet and he's like he was a good lover was he and then how would I know? I wouldn't feel anything. And of course, that makes that references Renard's inability to feel anything. But the context of that scene is that their relationship dynamic, that Renard, although he is this great terrorist, is emotionally stunted, and thus their relationship, she is like the aggressive figure and is how she was able to quote unquote turn Renard when she was the kidnappee and start this whole thing in the first place. So it's an interesting dynamic that the strong supposed great villain is actually emotionally stunted and almost again the notion of that childlike quality. And then he punches the table and he just like stares at the blood pouring out of the wound and he's like I feel nothing and the impact of that idea not being able to feel anything really hits at that point. You can see it on his face. So I think that's really fascinating. And again, I honestly I wish there was more of that in the film. Like I'm like I want a whole movie of that. That's fantastic. um then you get to Die Another Day, and we again have this sort of uh, villain is not what he seems, but of course, we get the setup in the pre-titles, and it's sort of the opposite of Goldeneye. Instead of it being 006 apparently dying and coming back as the villain, we have the villain of the pre-titles comes back, but under a different guise. And of course, they use the idea of Moonraker, the novel version of Drax, pretending to be a great philanthropist, but actually, just trying to destroy the world. Um, and of course, as Graves, he admits he patterned himself on the Bond swagger and style. And so, in just the short time we met, you made a lasting impression on me. So I decided to model the disgusting Gustav Graves on you, which of course is a great dig at Bond. It's like, oh, I made this evil characterization that most of the world can't stand, and I based it on you because I hate you. It's like, okay, that's pretty weighty there. Um, so yeah, they pull from the Moonraker novel, which I appreciated because that had never been used. So that was really fun. Um, of course, the film does have its issues, but I still like what Toby Stevens is able to do with the role, and you get a bit of the traditional Bond megalomaniac villain, and of course, he has a space laser satellite, which is a bit on the fantasy side of things. But it's nice to see that every once in a while. you um and then moving into the Craig era again, I'm trying to get through as much of these as I can because I want to try and get to all of your questions this time. Moving into the Craig era, they finally get to do Casino Royale as an official film, and you get Mads Mikkelsen doing his version of Le Chiffre, which was really great to see on the big screen. Get to see Le Chiffre done straight, not as a spoof and not as a 50s life television thing. Um, but again, with differences because the film makes a lot of changes and things. But I think particularly in the confrontation scenes and all of the gambling table scenes, he has great menace as Le Chiffre does in the novel. So it was nice in that way to get finally a visualization of how I pictured Le Chiffre reading the book all these years. So I thought that was one of the better aspects of Casino 2006. Um, then getting into Quantum of Solace, uh, you have the character of Dominic Green. I like the idea of his plot revolving around water, being a very grounded element of his plot motivation, and how it's manipulating people, and how it's a legitimate problem. There are water shortages across the entire world, and actually having clean water is a great problem in many territories. And if you think about it, if that resource is gone, there's no way to replace it. So I thought that was a really great attempt to do a different sort of plot that hadn't been really considered before in the other films. Of course, they got hit with the writer's strike, and they had to do all kinds of on-set rewriting, which did hurt the film. It does have a lot of issues, but in a lot of ways, I like the fact that it's a little bit rough. It's very short. The runtime is much shorter. I don't like the CGI. I don't like the fast cut editing style, particularly in the opening sequence. But I do like the sort of roughness it is that has this rough hewn sort of quality to it, which it takes some risks. Basically, is what I'm trying to say, and I like that it does that. You know, we see Bond get drunk for the first time ever. And that happens sometimes in the Fleming novels, and it makes Bond very human in that sense. So I appreciated little things like that. As a whole, the film doesn't exactly work, but I appreciate some of the little rough patches and elements where they go off formula, and they do something really different because they had to come up with something because there was a writer's strike on. So I thought that was interesting. And then in Skyfall, you have the Silva character, and there is a lot of sort of what you have in Goldeneye in terms of it being a former ally coming back for vengeance sort of thing. But I like what Javier Bardem does with some of the like the performance quirks he has in there. Of course, they play on the traditional Bond villain scene, where he basically sort of comes on to Bond in a sort of manipulative way. And then after the response, instead of doing the something surprise Mr. Bond, he does that little, oh, Mr. Bond. It's sort of playful in a way, which I really liked. So he has this whole mission of revenge, which it's shrouded in mystery, and we don't know the whole scope of it. But I like that he has this sort of playful quality. He's going to get his revenge, but he's going to, do it in his own fashion. And then that gets us to Spectre when we finally have Blofeld reappear, which I have to admit, like as soon as they announced Christoph Waltz, I'm like, oh, well, they've got him for Blofeld, and I can see that. That kind of makes sense. But I, I really hated what they did with it. I did the whole they're technically semi-related now, pulling the Oberhauser character, and then that I hate that line. I am the author of all your pain, James. Like, oh, it's like, guys, you this is literally Goldmember here. Like, this is Goldmember territory. Daddy didn't love me. But I thought the casting was fine. Like, I thought Christoph Waltz was a perfect idea for Blofeld. I didn't like what they did with it, like story wise. I thought that was not the best idea. I actually would preferred it if we had a little bit of the unseen Blofeld for a bit first before we got the full Blofeld reveal again. Like maybe had the No Time to Die villain in Spectre with Blofeld behind the scenes, and then for the next film, since it was the last Craig film, sort of like how we had You Only Live Twice being the last Connery film, we finally get to see Blofeld, and they could tie it into the earlier films if they had wanted to, and that you thought it was Quantum at first, but it was actually Spectre, and the head of Spectre you don't get to see into the last movie, and oh my god, it's actually Blofeld, and built up to a little bit more since they were finally doing it. But it was great to finally see, Spectre being able to be used again in name, and Blofeld is actually, in a film again. But it felt really weird. I must admit, I was not a fan of how they did that. But I saw what they were going for basically, and I know that was a very long-winded answer, but I hope I was able to cover everything to an extent.
Oh no, that was great. That was great. I have I still struggle. I mean, I've mentioned this before with you, but I'll say it again. I still struggle a lot with Spectre, to be perfectly blunt. And
Oh yes.
I'm not.
I'm
I
holding back a lot.
yeah, I don't
uh,
have the. I don't. I mm, I don't understand. I don't understand that whole concept. Why did they?
yes.
What was the motivation behind that choice? I
Hmm.
think I kind of know, but it doesn't make sense at all. It really doesn't make
No,
sense, and it's like
no.
this. It's like this. Um, it's this. I have this sense. It's like this need to want to have some kind of ownership over the past legacy aspect of it, and by doing and the means of doing that is by somehow taking authorship over the biographical details of the character, by inserting this connection with between Blofeld and Bond. And I still don't get it from the a practical point of view. I don't see how. I don't know how he would have Bond. I don't know how he would have passed all those background checks that I'm sure one would need to have if one is going to be working for MI6. I mean, we know
Well,
that.
Trevelyan got through those too, so they've
Oh,
already
that's a
done
good
that
point.
before.
Actually, that's a good point. I have a feeling that maybe with Trevelyan, that either he slipped through the cracks, which I don't think is possible, or actually I think the implications that they knew
Yeah, they
about.
knew, and
Yes,
they were like, "Oh,
yeah,
well,
we'll use
he
him
was
anyway.
too
Yeah,
young, and yeah,
yes,
we can
yeah,
still use him." Just
exactly.
like
Yes,
how the Russians in From Russia with Love, the novel, decide,
yes, Grant. Yes.
okay, we're either going to kill this guy, or well, we could really use him because the weird guys are not a dime a dozen. So yeah, we'll take him.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, I think that's the implication.
yeah. So that probably explains it. So maybe there was, but at the same time, it wasn't clear that it was Blofeld, I suppose. So it wasn't as though that biographical detail would necessarily create some potential conflict of interest on the part of Bond
Yeah.
necessarily, at least as far as the British government would identify it. So that's still something. Although I struggle with that film so much, to be
Yeah,
perfectly
and
honest. Yeah.
you know me very well. I am no fan of the Craig era. I really can't stand them, but that doesn't stop me from examining them and pointing out high points and recognizing positives, and trying to understand what they were going for and what the influences were, and things like that. So I still go see every film when it's released. I'm honor bound and everything. So I still analyze them, even though I really don't like them at all. That's I try to find ways to sugarcoat it in a way. Like, I really can't stand them, but again, that doesn't stop me from analyzing them and pointing out positives and things, because no film is irredeemable completely. So I think that's always important in criticism, is if you're going to criticize something, you still have to point out the positives. You still have to say, hey, this part really works, and this is what they're trying to do, and I think they achieved it here. I wouldn't have done it that way, but you still have to look at it from an unbiased perspective.
No, I applaud that approach, and I support it, and I agree with it 100%. I think that's the best way to do it. And also, you never know how things will affect you over time,
Yeah.
because something might be. I mean, I've mentioned this before, but I didn't like, for example, film like Diamonds Are Forever when I was young, but when I grew up, it became a real favorite, for the
Yeah.
reasons that you were alluding to earlier,
It
about how.
opens up. It
Yeah,
opens up over time, because as a kid, you're like, well, this one's kind of weird.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then I remember when I realized when I found out what the term raunchy meant, when I was a kid, I was like,
Mm,
oh, it's kind of raunchy in a way. It's a little like there's like an element of like maybe a little bit of sleaziness
yeah,
almost, because it's
yeah,
in Vegas and it's the early 70s and
yeah.
has this relaxed vibe, and it's like it's very strange. But it's just it. I mean, it's Tom Mankiewicz. It's when you're a kid and the Tom Mankiewicz one-liners come up, they just fly over your head. And then you suddenly one day you're rewatching Diamonds Are Forever, and you're finally able to realize what a certain line means, and you're like, oh my god, that's what that means. And then the implications hit you, and then some of the ones that are multi-layered, and then the full impact doesn't hit you, like, and you're like, oh my god, that's genius. That's so sly. It's like sadistic genius that he got that in there. It's like, as a kid, you don't know what collars and cuffs match mean. You have no idea. And so like I would always wonder, I'm like, so your shirt collar has to match the color of the curtains in the room. Like, what? I don't understand. It's just one of those things, and it's not like you can just ask people. It's like, what does that mean? And you just puzzle over it. It messed me up in The Man with the Golden Gun. Just a random line when Bond says, the oil sheikhs will pay you to keep solar energy off the market. And as a kid, I didn't know that, the controlling oil interests were literally, he was talking about actual sheikhs in the Middle East, actual sheikhs who controlled oil interests. I thought Bond was talking about the leaders of oil companies, and that for some reason that you called like CEOs of oil of companies sheikhs, as in SHAKES. So as a kid, I thought Bond was saying that the heads of oil companies were sheikhs. So for some reason, it stuck in my head. So still to this day, if I'm hearing a news story and they're talking about some head of the company, and I'm like, oh yeah, that oil sheikh, and I'm like, oh no, not again. So it's just an example of one of those things you don't quite get the connotation as a kid, and that's just a random line. But
Yeah.
especially the Mankiewicz witticisms, they just, speak now, forever hold your peace. I mean,
Yeah.
that's sublime.
Yeah.
It's just, oh
I feel that way too. Although most of them, I would say, are due to the sexual innuendo. When I was
yes,
little, I didn't
yes.
get I didn't get any of them. The one from Diamonds Are
You
Forever.
were there for the adventure
Yes,
and the action and the
right, exactly,
coolness.
exactly. But what does he say? Right. I have more than my hands up, or something like that. Like, oh, okay, I see that now when I'm older. But when you're a little kid, it just right goes over. And then there's one though that I don't think it's sexual innuendo at all, but I never got it until a little bit later in life, which was when Scaramanga is explaining his whole Solix agitator use in the compound. And he says, when he shows off the laser, and he says, now I am indeed, right, the man with the golden gun. Never quite got
Yes.
that. But then, oh, of course, yes, the sun.
And then I couldn't resist. I don't have safari suits, although I know everybody makes jokes about them. I love Roger's sort of safari outfits. This is the closest thing I have to a sort of. I don't know. I didn't realize it wasn't really visible, but I went to
Oh,
my
I
closet and
see.
I'm like,
I see.
I used to have Bond t-shirts, but I wore them out. Like I wore them so many times they just fell apart in the wash. So I was like, I gotta find something, and I'm like, I've always wanted at least something like the green safari shirt that Bond has in Man with the Golden Gun. And I've
Yeah.
just seeing that, like, again, some of the clothing has just,
Yeah.
of course, we all want to go to Turnbull and Asser and get a
course.
shirt made
Of course.
and go to Anthony Sinclair's and
Yeah.
get a suit tailored. But
Yeah.
of course, we don't have the expense to do that. But I was like, and then suddenly struck me. I'm like, I actually got this shirt when I got it, and my thought was, hey, that kind of looks like a safari shirt. Doesn't have the straps on the shoulders, but I've
It's
always
so
wanted
cool.
a bunch of those shirts because I'm so obsessive. So yeah, I was like, I'm gonna throw this on, and I'm like, nobody's gonna realize, but it's got the pockets and everything. So
That's
I couldn't resist.
that's so cool. I wish I could say that I had the same kind of Roger Moore fashion sensibilities, but maybe to borrow a line from him, um, you know, um, I'm with the economy tour, so
Yes,
so, so
I I know I
oh.
couldn't pull it off either. Like, it's
No, no,
like
you great.
you
It's great. No,
you could get
yeah.
a Bond suit made, but you just you I'd feel so ridiculous.
No,
Like, I
no,
just
no.
feel like I can't pull this off.
That's part of the fun. We should talk about that's its own little industry, which is the Bond fashion. So we'll have to talk about
Yes.
that and other things as well. The little, I'm not quite sure. Well, actually, no, I'll save that for another day. But Anyway, my friends, so let us pause this, and then we will continue this at a very an occasion in the very near future, if that's okay. So, Spencer,
absolutely.
thank you so much for this. This was so great as always. I enjoy these immensely. And so, but it's not over. So, as we say,
Yes.
Spencer and Daisuke will return. James Bond will return. So, my dear friend, thank you so much. And we'll talk again very soon.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.